Apparently all I have to do is that.
Are you left-handed?
Okay.
Okay. You're ambidextrous? Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Trillo. Thank you. Well, I'll get it. There you are. Dr. Tullock.
She's an education professor.
Yeah.
Oh man, someone's got it up to like 75.
That's the way it was.
Oh, that's fine. But no way, baby, it's going down to 55.
Well, let's not get crazy. 55.
Well, if you turn into an icicle, sister, let me know.
All right.
I can't say that I will still change it, but offer it up for the poor souls. This is what they and say they would. Okay, speaker. Oh, darn it. That's not.
While we're waiting, we could talk about our favorite virtues.
Yeah, go ahead.
We prefer to talk about vices.
But no, I don't have any.
Oh.
Oh,
I'm kidding.
I think that's the topic we need to discuss.
Right. The vices?
Good Jane having no vices.
That's right.
We have to talk about the vices. Well, in the old manual, some of them they had to write in Latin. They couldn't read it. Oh. All right, actually, I already put that in there. Okay. That's interesting. So I have to go to my USB drive, my flash drive, which I left upstairs because I had my PowerPoint. Excuse me, I'll be right back. I left
We'll
my-
discuss cardinal virtues while you're gone.
Yes, please. Because I forgot I didn't put it into the U drive. It's on. If it's not on the U
I
drive.
don't even think you can get it on the U drive down here.
Can I try still?
Yeah?
Okay, thank you. Give me a couple minutes. I'll be right back.
So what's your favorite virtue? Prudence, justice,
Patience.
fortitude, temperance. Anybody?
Prudence for me.
Mine is prudence too.
Yours is prudence. So, practical reason to discern our true good in every circumstance and to choose the right means of achievement.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard. That's a difficult one. Prudence, justice,
Fortitude.
Justice is tough.
I didn't know there was cardinal virtues and then just regular virtues. Yeah.
The four cardinals are prudence, justice, fortitude,
Right.
temperance. Then there's the
Theological.
theological virtues, faith, hope, and
Faith, hope,
charity.
and charity.
Right,
The gifts of the Holy Spirit.
right.
There's other virtues too, I don't know what they're called, I forget. Oh, but they flow from the cardinal moral virtues.
Right.
Yeah.
So is that something that John Paul, like obviously he wrote it, but he gleaned it from, like what was his source, or that was his like,
What?
this thing, the
Is it
catechism.
cyclical?
Like, yeah,
Oh, yes.
where did he get his teachings from? Like specific,
Basically from the Catholic moral teaching,
okay,
and also the teachings of the popes prior to him that are still, I want to say valid, but need to be clarified because of the language and because of the change in the culture of the world today.
gotcha. So but this is the most updated.
Uh-huh.
Gotcha.
I did too.
Splendor Veritas, is that what it is you're looking at?
Yes.
Ready to talk to Splendor.
Veritatis Splendor, Splendor.
Splendor, if we want to be correct.
When that was, was it when that was published, I was in Rome, and I went to a meeting where some cardinals, I don't know who they were, did a whole workshop on that. And it was not in English, it was in Italian, so I had to wear the earphones.
Yeah.
And it was really hard to, they crackled and everything. Oh, I had a hard time with it, but I thought it was a great, it was like a panel discussion.
Oh,
I thought it was really well done.
yeah, he said, I don't remember when it was published, but he said that he wanted the catechism to come out before he wrote that.
But he wrote it after that.
He wrote it after,
Yeah, right.
after the catechism was released.
Yeah, this is the next year.
Yeah. What was the one on economics that he wrote? What was that one?
I don't remember.
I forget.
Yeah.
Maybe it was, I don't know. What were his letters or his encyclicals? Not,
Is it in
It
here?
must say at the beginning of this.
Veritatis Splendor.
Now you're just throwing out Latin to look
Yeah.
smart.
The one on family, what was that called?
Okay.
Help me.
I'm looking in the table of contents. Is it in here?
I don't know.
Okay, so his, all right, I've got his encyclicals
Respect for
here.
human life.
Yeah, tell me what they are.
All of them?
Well,
Centesimus Annus.
wait, go slow.
Centesimus Annus, which is on the 100th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, which is on capital and labor.
But that wasn't encyclical, was it?
Yeah, these are encyclicals.
By who?
JB2.
Oh, no, I'm talking about Francis.
Oh, Francis, I'm sorry.
Laudato Si.
Laudato Si is,
Hang on a
yeah.
second.
But what was the, did he do one on, I don't know, maybe he didn't do it, maybe it was JP2.
There's only two encyclicals,
What are they?
Laudato Si and Lumen Fidei.
That's Pope Francis.
That's Francis.
Yeah, okay, now tell me, John Paul. Go slow, because I'm slow.
All right, Centesimus Annus.
Yeah, right,
Okay. Dives Misericordia.
no,
Okay. Dominum et Vivicantem.
no,
Ecclesia de Eucharistica.
No.
Eucharistia.
no.
Evangelium Vitae.
That was for nuts.
The
Go
Gospel
ahead.
of Life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fides et Ratio. Faith
What
and-
was that?
Fides et Ratio. That's faith and reason.
Oh, okay,
The next one, Laborum Exercens, on human work.
yeah, okay. That was the one that I went to as well, okay.
Redemptor Hominis.
What?
Redemptor Hominis.
No, no.
Redemptoris Mater. Remember that one? Where he almost named Mary as co-redemptrix.
Oh, that was dangerous, yeah.
And I remember Joe Farias and I talking about that, and he said to me, I don't know what I will do if he does that.
I know, that's really bad. It's like making another god. All
right.
right, go ahead.
Redemptoris Missio.
No,
Slavorum Apostoli.
no.
Solicitudo Rei Socialis.
That's
Social
about
concerns.
priesthood, yeah, go ahead, I don't know.
Okay. Et unum sint.
What?
Et ut unum sint.
Oh, that's the one on churches and ecclesial communities.
Ecumenism, yes. And then Veritatis Splendor.
Okay, that's it. All right, it was the one on labor, work that I was talking
Yes, which was Laborum Exercens.
about? Right. Thank you,
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Anytime?
There we go. Okay, I got two here. Let's try the newer one. Let's try that. Good, okay. Okay, sorry about that. Good to see you all. Let's see if we'll leave this. I'm back, Mr. Trillo, sorry. I did post the online week last week. It took me a while, I'm sorry, it's because I tried to do it with this extension Screencastify that's on Google Chrome, and something happened and it wasn't working well, so I had to use my own software. Unfortunately, it takes forever. I mean, to do the lectures fine, you know, I sat there for 2.5 hours talking to my computer, PowerPoint in front of me, and but you know, to convert it and all this stuff takes hours, and then I had to upload it to YouTube. So anyway, so now the video lecture for last week is on YouTube. I finished talking about virtues, which hopefully you've read about, and values, and also ethics, okay? So take a look at that, please. Take notes on it. And I'm going to move on to the next section, which is Jesus as ethico-moral norm. Does anyone have any questions about the readings, or?
You do understand that, at least for me, the only thing I did was part 3 of Catechism, which is what you originally gave us.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. I told you to read that section.
Yeah, I only saw about the video this afternoon, so I'll get to it.
That's fine. I'm just telling you about it right now.
Okay.
So whenever you have a chance, sometime in the next week or so,
Okay.
please get to it.
All right.
Okay. Interesting. Might have overheated. Let's see. Yeah, turned off. Sometimes it can overheat, especially I guess if you're keeping the room at home. Uh-oh. That's not good.
That's a power outage.
That's
In the whole building.
Now you've done it.
Jeez.
That's Murphy's Law telling us that we need an adult libation. I'm just telling you.
I agree with you.
I already owe Jane a,
You do owe me an
Glass of
adult
wine.
libation, Jerry,
I
and
do, I
I'm
already
totally
a
calling you.
glass of wine.
I
You
need
can bring it
something
to our next
stronger.
class.
Oh, I don't know about that. Next week, we can meet and watch the video with wine.
When's next week's date? Next week we're not here. No,
Right, that's what I
I'd
mean.
be open to that if the room upstairs is available.
Wow.
Is it all, the whole building out,
Mm-hmm, yes.
even upstairs?
Seems so.
Holy cow. I'll go find out. I'll ask Kathy about
I'm gonna call security.
it.
Hey. I think there's a maintenance guy here.
I
don't
feel
mean to
like-
chuckle.
I feel like this
Honestly,
is a snow day, that's what.
Yeah, I
it is.
really don't mean to chuckle. It's just like, I'm chuckling because it's like,
Seriously.
what else?
Yes,
Seriously.
yes.
Smite me again, mighty smiter.
Did you get my email, my text?
I don't believe so.
Let me see, I texted you saying something. And I'm
But
gonna,
seriously, if everybody here wants to get together next Monday, we can go upstairs and Jane can check if the room's available, and we'll watch the video upstairs together.
so are you 973-975-7710?
So when did you text?
He posted it on.
It might not have gone through, but that's your,
I did that already. You looked
I'm
at
surprised I
that?
didn't grow your
Yeah,
whole bunch of
2.5
undergrads go.
and 2 hours.
so I,
Because
Yeah,
they're over there.
I did that falling asleep at 2 a.m. in the morning and I
Oh
took
my
notes.
God. And what we read?
She looked at
The video.
But I wasn't sure whether the 115 other ones, which ones do we look at?
There's only one on the Moodle.
No,
Yes.
if you go into that
No, there's only one on Moodle.
YouTube link, it
No.
takes
No. There's
On
only
Moodle.
one that's on Moodle, and then it takes you into YouTube and it opens it up.
And
When
right.
you go on YouTube, a lot of other YouTube show up.
Yeah, a lot of other
You don't
things
pay
come up.
attention.
Oh.
I don't see a text.
Okay, so I thought he.
I'm gonna try again.
Okay.
Might be because the power's out.
But no, I.
Because I've been
I-
watching the texts
I
because
listened
my
to the
mother lives in
lecture already.
Florida with my sister.
is she all right?
Are they doing
Oh, they're
okay?
okay. I fear for my sister more than my mother.
Where are they?
Why is that?
Well, my mother said, what was the big deal? It's, oh, I see.
Security is on it. They're calling whomever they need to call.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You want me to?
Did you get it? Did you get it?
I responded.
Oh, good.
Well, I don't need the PowerPoint. I can still teach. I mean,
Okay.
I guess if you don't want to have any lost time, unfortunately, that would mean he wouldn't get anything recorded, so.
Okay.
Can you send us the PowerPoint?
Oh, yeah, I can send it to you.
So at least then we have the content.
Sure.
Okay.
I can't do it now, though.
No, I know, but I'm just saying like,
No, I know in the
or-
future.
yeah.
I'm
Put it
just
on the Moodle.
worried about, yeah, I'll put my PowerPoints on the Moodle. I don't know
Thank
if I put the other one on yet. But I'll put both of them on. And I guess we'll have to just do whatever for Mr. Trillo, who's not with us. And I'll just have to refer him. If anyone is willing to like give a copy of your notes to him, I'd appreciate it.
sure.
Yeah, but I don't want to, you can see, and I don't want to waste time, and who knows how long this is going to take. There, get this out of the way. Do we have any markers here? We do, okay. Okay. So no questions on virtues? Nothing?
What's your favorite?
My favorite? Well, prudence, of course.
Oh, good. Did you hear Sister Alice's answer when you left?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay.
But as a nun, as a sister in religion, I'm sure it was
That was my favorite too.
prudence.
Yep, and so it was Sally's too.
Why? Why is Cleary,
Because
right?
it's-
Ms. Cleary?
Yeah.
Why is that? Why should prudence be your favorite virtue, Ms. Cleary?
Well, because it requires thought and discernment and judgment to some degree about what you should or should not do.
Okay, good. I think that the ancient philosophers and medieval philosophers would be in agreement with you on that. So much so that they might have had a special way of describing the virtue of prudence. How might they have described prudence?
Who are we talking about?
I'm sorry?
Prudence.
Who would have described prudence? I'm sorry.
Ancient philosophers or even medieval philosophers? Ms. Bourne is not here, is she? No?
No.
What's today, the 11th? Not here is, I'm sorry if I get Ms. Caponegro? Okay, good, I got you. Mr. Cusano, Ms. Cleary, Ms. Marshall Young, Mr. Trillo in spirit, Ms. Murphy Morris. Okay, good. So it's just Ms. Bourne. Maybe she'll come, maybe she won't. Let's see what happens. Okay, I've given you some time to think. What is prudence called? It's so important, the practice of the virtuous life. The ancient philosophers and those who based their teachings on them, like the medievals, like Thomas Aquinas and others, had a special term for prudence. What was she called? And I only say she because a lot of times in the Middle Ages, when they represented wisdom, no. But that's good because we talk about the Book of Wisdom. And prudence is mentioned, yes. But wisdom, for the author of the Book of Wisdom, wisdom, which is knowledge of God, especially as given through the law of Moses, is higher than all of the virtues. But the virtues are important. They're valuable. But no, let's just think about just philosophical virtues. Prudence, temperance, fortitude, and justice. Why does prudence always come first?
Well, without
Because
prudence,
it's a
you,
way of deciding right or wrong.
You have to weigh both sides of an issue.
Okay, good.
well, without the others flow from prudence.
Yes, it's the first step.
Excellent point, yes. The other virtues flow from prudence. Prudence is a virtue, but prudence is actually the premier virtue. And so, and I'll just answer this right now, just quizzing you in a kind of, informal fashion, that they would call prudence the charioteer. This virtue kind of, that's pooped out, if I use my own marker. Prudence guides the other virtues, because it's not just about knowing what to do, but how to do it, okay? Which is not really the case with some of the other virtues. I might know that I need to be courageous in the practice of virtue. I have to have fortitude, bravery, courage. But I can have too much. I can overdo it. I can have, say, I really need to practice the virtue of justice. So when hard times come, when I'm maybe challenged on my practice of justice, I think, well, I have to now practice the virtue of fortitude, which is perseverance in justice, and the other virtues, persevering. Keep going at it, keep working at it. Yeah, but it's like almost lifting a muscle for weights. You can overdo it and you can wound the muscle. You can tear so much muscle that you hurt yourself. You can exercise so much that you hurt yourself. Okay, the same thing with the virtues, except that you're in a way tearing spiritual muscle, maybe psychological muscle might be a more modern way of putting it. Where you might say, I'm going to practice justice, I have to be brave and practice it 110%. Okay, to everybody? Because now we have to consider context. Practicing justice to say my mother should be different than practicing it towards someone I don't know. If I say I'm going to practice it ruthlessly, everybody gets the same. Mother, father, children, stranger, they all get the same. You know, the same from me, which is kind of like what justice is about, giving each person their due. Okay, but that might be too much. Prudence would dictate, well, consider, yes, you want to practice the virtue of perseverance and the virtues like justice and other things. But maybe you're going too far. You want to consider the context, and maybe you want to moderate. Oh, moderation as well. Interesting. So prudence is an excellent virtue. It's very, yes, you're on track with that, about it being able to, using reason to determine what you should do, but then how you should do it. Okay. So the virtues. Okay, if no one has any real questions about them, then just say read the catechism. The catechism talks about it. Read the readings as well. And also, a lot of it that maybe won't be clear will be clear in the lecture that I give on the video things. So just turn down the lights, light a few candles, little incense, turn on some
Little
nice,
wine, just
yeah, well, I wouldn't say
A
that.
lot of wine.
I'm not going to advocate getting drunk.
There's at least a debauchery.
Release the debauchery, yes, okay. And listen to Mr. Dunn's voice. And also watch him on his PowerPoint. Okay, so Jesus as ethical, moral. The next section I'm going on to, as I've now explained some of the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about in this course, Catholic moral theology, but what morality, but what makes it Catholic and theology, which makes it theological? Jesus. Next question. The answer to every question. Although no one has tried me on that yet, I haven't gotten any tests back with Jesus marked as. I'll be in a dilemma then, because they say Jesus is the answer to every question. So what am I going to do? I guess I'll have to give the person an A. But Jesus of Nazareth. I certainly want to, I hope everything is safe, but I certainly, before I forget, to pray and to pray that Jesus might bless us all and bless the people down in Florida and the Caribbean who've been suffering from the hurricanes, and maybe some more. I think there are a couple more generating in the Atlantic. So I'm glad, Holy Lord, that Irma wasn't as bad as maybe they predicted, although I think the Keys got devastated, and certainly the Caribbean. So I pray for the dead, Jesus, that they may know your merciful peace and rest in that. And for all those suffering, Jesus, I pray for your grace upon them. And for us here, thank you for this beautiful day, this nice weather, that we get the chance to be together and enjoy each other's company. Thank you for that, Jesus. And all the things that might be in our heart, good or bad, things that make us happy, Jesus, the things that maybe we're worried about, I offer them up to you. In your name, Jesus. Amen. Well, I don't have access to any maps, so I can't show you where Nazareth is. But Jesus of Nazareth. I'm going to assume you know how to spell his name. And his name is Jesus, not Jeebus. Anyone see that Simpsons episode where Homer becomes a missionary by accident? He's trapped on a plane going somewhere to educate the natives about Jesus, and he says, oh no, Jeebus, you can't even get the, he doesn't even know what it is. It's as bad as taking one of our undergrads and sending them to be missionaries. Go, tell them about Christ, it's like, who? What? Christ? Is that a new iteration of the iPhone, Mr. Dunn? iPhone Christ. Huh? Well, they do have God mode on computers, so who knows? So Jesus of Nazareth, he lived between or around 6 BC, and he left this. No, it doesn't work. No electricity.
Oh, this doesn't work either?
Yeah, no.
Okay. It had a dial tone, but I guess nobody's gonna pick it up.
Yeah, I picked it up and the dial tone died on me, so I couldn't get out. Try your cell phone if you need it. All right, 6 BC. circa 33 AD. I'm going to assume you know what these abbreviations are. If you don't, please ask me. It's not any big shakes if you don't know what AD means. Hold on a second, I just want to get, maybe I left it upstairs.
But those numbers are interesting.
Those numbers are interesting, yes, sir. What makes them interesting?
Well, because they contradict tradition.
Tradition, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a tradition on the dates
Tradition-
of Jesus.
Well, tradition says that, well, not on the dates themselves, but on the age span, the lifespan.
Okay.
Now, of course, we don't know for sure, and there's no way of knowing for sure. We can only surmise.
Can we? Can we?
Well, sure. We don't know, well, there was no documentation. We don't, for instance, we don't know for sure when Christ was born. We know,
Perhaps.
we know from, sure, there's historical, there are historical things that we know that, who was, when Quirinius was governor and so on, okay? We know.
That's good, but you stepped in it with that because Quirinius is actually one of the problems in dating the birth of Jesus.
Well,
But go ahead.
I was just looking to give you an opening. So now this time span would suggest, if it were to be taken as correct, that Christ was 39 when he was crucified. Now, tradition says that he was 33.
Okay. And where are you getting this tradition from, though?
Well,
Mr.?
that's just what it is. It's tradition of the church.
Okay,
Okay? But it doesn't, no,
it has no source?
I don't know what that source would be, to be honest with you. And I'm not suggesting that we ought to take that as, no pun intended, gospel.
Okay.
Okay? I'm not
Fine.
suggesting that at all.
I
All
mean,
I'm
it could
saying
be
is,
true, it could not be true.
correct.
Yeah.
Listen, there's probably almost zero chance, well, 1 in 365, that Jesus was born on December the 25th. The same thing. It's a 1 in 365 chance, but I would say it's
Probably not.
Probably
Probably not.
probably.
But we do have sources, do we not, from the first century?
Of course, yes. Sources from the first century, yes.
That we could consult, historical sources. I would consider the Gospels historical sources, even though they are religious texts. So you have to take that into account. But we also have other sources, for example, Josephus, the Jew, who refers to, and other Roman historians who refer, they did not know, of course, Jesus, but refer to the period of time when he was alive.
Right.
So we can have a general sense of when he was alive, sometime in the early 1st century. Okay.
I'm looking at the time span as intriguing me.
Well, why does it intrigue you? I mean, who told you he died when he was 33? I mean, where's your source for that?
I can't point to I of course can't point to a source.
Yeah, you're just told. It's like,
Of course.
it's an urban
It's
legend.
it's an oral tradition, it's an urban legend, correct.
It's just, I wouldn't even call it an oral tradition because I think that, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I think you want to be careful because, in Catholicism, you're going to talk about sacred tradition, which itself is perhaps not the best word to use. But that's how it is in English and other languages. When we talk about traditions, do you mean something that's binding and normative, or do you mean something that's like eating turkey on Thanksgiving? It's like, whatever. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, some early Christian writers, for example, Irenaeus of Lyon in southern France, who's a bishop of southern France, he thought that Jesus was crucified around the age of 50.
Really?
Yes. Yes, he did. But yet, his evidence for that was not the Gospels. His evidence was more theological. He thought that since Jesus had sanctified birth, so infancy by becoming a baby, and also made holy, childhood by being a toddler and a teenager, he had also sanctified young adulthood by being a young man in his 20s. And then he sanctified middle age by being a man in late 30s and 40s. So it only made sense to this man Irenaeus that Jesus would also sanctify elderly, and for him that was in the 50s, when you were 50s. Do we have any statement at all in the writings about Jesus, the Gospels, of when he began his ministry?
I'm not sure this says anything about his age.
You're not sure? Well, good.
Jesus
That
in the
means that
temple,
when I
huh?
get paid on Friday, I'm earning my money.
I don't remember
I'm earning the
anything.
bacon, you know what I'm saying?
I don't remember anything in the Gospels.
Okay.
I don't remember, certainly at the baptism of Jesus, I don't remember that any, I could be wrong, but I don't remember anything saying he was 3 years
Well, it does.
old. Does it?
Yeah, it does. Jesus, Luke, if we turn to the God, and this is, I know this is not a New Testament or biblical studies course because the
No,
question
it's
comes
necessary.
up. It's necessary? Okay.
Well, it's good.
I mean, but you have to remember, this is a moral theology class, so I'm assuming knowledge. You understand what I'm saying? Not necessarily on your part, but I'm also assuming the scholarship. You understand the background, okay? The stuff that I know or have read, or the people have told me, because believe me, there is tradition, small t, Mr. Cusano, in academics as well. You know, but you still have to do like what Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. And so, huh?
Luke says 30
Where,
years
where?
He does.
Tell me where.
Excellent.
Chapter 3,
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the notes.
23,
Chapter 3,
right? What,
20.
verse 20.
So when
Chapter
Jesus
3, 23.
began,
He was about 30, you're
it
right.
was about 30.
Oh, it's in the genealogy, okay.
Yes.
All right, that dreaded genealogy.
About 33, or excuse me, about 30 years old. Yeah. No, well, he didn't say 30 years of age,
It
does
says
he?
right there, about.
When Jesus began his ministry, he was about 30 years
Yes.
of age.
See, remember, we read these things so often that yes, but read the whole, about 30. He could have been 28.
Right.
He could have been
32.
32. Exactly. Excellent. Thank you for looking that up. I reverence you. No, I do. That's excellent. Yes, so you looked it up. Don't take my word for it, even if I could have told you, but also verify what I said. Make sure I'm accurate.
Now, is there anything to suggest that?
Now, hold on one second, because I just want to add to that.
Please.
Regarding his ministry, Luke also is able to tell us from the sources that he consulted, apparently people either who knew Jesus, he mentions eyewitnesses, but also people who were ministers of the word, people who kept the stories alive and passed them on. He has historical details about when Jesus began his ministry. So that gives, he tells us about local leaders like Herod Philip, who was a son of this King Herod, and people like, was it Octavius? No, Octavius was when Jesus was born. Caesar Augustus was when Jesus was born. Tiberius. So now these are extra religious, these are not religious, these are not Christian figures. They're not made up. We know when people like Tiberius, the Roman emperor, Octavian, another Roman emperor, we know when they lived. So we have a time frame. If Octavian was, and so there, to answer your question, Jerry, Mr. Cusano, so now we have some limits. We have what they call the, what is it in Latin, the terminus a quo, the terminus from which, and also the ad quem. Not exact, from which, this is just a Latin phrase, qua, okay, a quo, the terminus, the terminal, like for a train. The train has a terminal, why? Because it's where it starts and where it ends up. Same place, it comes in and goes out, terminus, that's where we get the word from. A quo simply means from which, okay? The origin. And then we have the ad quem, to which, where we're going, the end, okay? So right there we have some ideas. Also, Luke tells us that Jesus was born during the time of Herod the king. That's important, because sometimes the Gospels are sometimes a little bit messy with language, and sometimes they say someone's a king or whatever, who's really not, is a local ruler. But King Herod, we know, who is called the King of the Jews. Hey, thanks be to God. The King of the Jews. Nope. Oh well.
So just so you know, my facilities friend said the power's out on the entire campus.
Okay.
I'm assuming maybe on and off. Yeah.
Do they know why?
I'm sure.
No, she said I suggest you go home, but I said of course not. I go home.
Did she say
This
that?
is too good.
She did say I suggest you go home. Yeah.
What are you doing?
But she's not a But this is it's riveting.
Yeah, it's Jesus.
It's Jesus. We can't go home.
Jesus is fascinating. That's what I tell my undergrad students, and I tell you as well, like with the Bible. I don't know why people stay away from the Bible. It's one of the most fascinating
It's a very
things.
big book.
Just as literature. Well, it's big, but
That's
it's a
why.
big. But see, the Bible's
Yeah.
not, you can take it in bits.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm with you.
And it's got everything.
Oh, everything.
It's got everything that every soap opera has ever had.
Oh, even better, so.
No, the
You know,
Bible
I'm
really is
telling
rated,
some of
the
this-
Bible is rated R.
But you know, Mr. Cusano, I could tell my students some of these stories, and I could get away with it because it's in the Bible.
That's right.
I won't do it now because I don't want to make a nun blush.
Or us.
You can't make that.
I know, sister, hey, I'm including you. I'm gonna lie, come on.
I've taught it, baby.
I know you got it, I got it.
So,
But I'll
so,
just tell, hey, sister, just never get a wedding present from David. That's all I'm gonna say.
so can you get us to 33 AD from 6 BC?
Of course, well, I just told you, Octavian and Tiberius. And I also added King Herod. We know that King Herod, we know when he died in 4 BC. And we know that Jesus,
The Holy Innocents, right?
well, but we don't know, we only have one story about that, and nobody confirms it. So, I got you, but forget about that story.
All right.
I'll be honest with you, don't tell her, but I don't lose any sleep over it if it happened. But most biblical scholars would say, no, we don't think that happened, because it's only in Matthew's Gospel.
Okay.
But yeah, nevertheless, there is this tradition that Jesus had already been born before Herod, King Herod, who was king. Okay, he was installed as king by the Romans. This is an important historical point, okay? Because he was the first, well, I shouldn't say he was the first, because there was a period of time before that where the Jews had independence for a very brief time. But he was really the first king of Judea, recognized since the Davidic monarchy had ended centuries before. Okay?
But he
There
was
was
a
a
pagan.
brief period of independence, but that was quickly ended.
And he was a pagan, of course.
Oh, no, Herod was not a pagan.
Oh, Herod was a Jew?
That's a good question.
Okay.
That's a good question. Because he was called King of the Jews, wasn't he?
Right.
However, his mother was not a Jew. She was a
Oh.
Nabatean,
Which is,
which are non-Jews. They are a trading people to the east of Palestine. Nice spell. They are a trading people to the east of Palestine, which I will show you. There was, in fact, a great documentary on, I think, National Geographic Channel. Was it National Geographic? Well, I know I watched it with my mom. Anyways, has anyone heard of the ancient city of Petra?
Yes,
Okay.
why?
Well,
No, no, I-
there are people who haven't heard of it.
heard of
No,
it,
no, no,
yes.
Has anyone
I'm
not?
saying why I.
Not know.
I don't recall.
Okay. Has anyone not heard of it? No? Anybody else? Anybody? No? Has anyone, now, I kind of know my audience, so I'm making assumptions, they're probably wrong, but you never know. Did anyone see Indiana Jones and the Search and the Last Crusade?
No.
Yes.
Harrison Ford, Sean Connery, you saw it?
Yeah.
Then you've seen Petra. Remember the end of the movie where they go to that thing carved into the rock, that big building?
Okay.
That's part of Petra.
Okay.
That's the city, and it's part of the city. The people there, the Nabateans, those are the Nabateans. They had a whole city there. They were very wealthy, very wealthy. And and that place where you see, Indy goes in to get the Holy Grail, that place that's carved into stone is not the only place. They carved other things into that, but it's just a whole rock city. It's very famous on the World Heritage Sites. It's in the country of Jordan, so thank God ISIL might probably not get its hands on it because they're blowing up just about everything. But anywho, yes, Herod's mother was not. So the lineage for a Jew goes through the mother.
Right.
It's what's called matrilineal, the mother's line. So you have this man of dubious Jewish origin who is now called King of the Jews. Does that add some details to this Christmas when you go to Mass maybe, or go to your church and they read from the Gospels about the birth of Jesus? I bring you news of great joy. The Messiah, the King, has been born in Bethlehem. They already had a king. In fact, a king recognized by another government. A king who was not Jewish, though. Do you think that caused trouble amongst people?
Was he a puppet? I always thought he was a puppet of Rome.
He was a client of Rome, yes, but he was given a great, because he was actually called a king from the Roman Senate, he had a great deal of autonomy, independence from Rome. Certainly he was supposed to fight in that area of the world for Rome if they needed soldiers, and he was a really, I mean, Herod was supposedly, he's painted kind of as a bad guy in the Gospels, and Josephus the Jew, this Jewish historian, says Herod wasn't a very good guy. But he was a fantastic politician. He was, as with any great human political figure, male or female, he had his bad days and his good days. One day he could be cutting off heads, another day he's building underwater docks for boats, which was, brilliant. Even for that day, it was an engineering feat that they were able to make this cement that would still harden underwater. These people, they didn't have maybe iPhones and stuff, but they weren't living too badly sometimes.
So he was. I would also imagine that part of his job was also to keep the Jews in line.
Oh yes.
Okay.
And he did that by killing people. And that's why the Pharisees hated him, because the Pharisees wanted a pure Judaism. He did not, I think the Sadducees, another group that are mentioned in the Bible every now and then, who were mainly in the temple, were probably more on his side in the sense that they wanted general peace, to keep peace with the Romans, and so they were more willing to play the game. The Pharisees maybe not. And then of course there was the other group, which I'm sure you've heard of, the Essenes, who were so disgusted by Herod and also by the fact of the priests in the temple, there's a whole other issue with the priestly line being corrupted, that they simply leave Jewish society. This group, they're kind of like Jewish monks, the Essenes, if you don't know what we're talking about. They're called Essenes, but they're like Jewish. So this is kind of the world that Jesus is born into, a Jewish ruler called King of the Jews, who's probably not Jewish. Jews who are so disgusted with Jewish society that they check out, they go out to the desert, they found their own communities and live the law as they think. You have Jews like the Pharisees who separate themselves from other Jews by living the law meticulously as they interpret it very rigorously. Also very piously, they had a very good reputation amongst many of the lower classes, but the everyday people, okay? And then you have the kind of like the trendies, maybe you want to call them the Sadducees, who were also, I'd say they were faithful Jews. I know they're portrayed kind of very negatively in the Gospels, but they seemed, they were willing to bend and not break in their Judaism. Herod himself seemed to have been a believer. He was not a pagan. He seemed to have believed in Judaism, from what we can tell. I mean, he wasn't just out there, like worshiping idols and stuff. But he did have to hang around people who were idol worshippers from the viewpoint of the Jews, who were, as I said, pagans, the Romans and Greeks and stuff like that. And so there was that issue, and maybe he wasn't as fervent in his public Judaism as he was maybe in his private Judaism. So these are all things going on in the background. And now you have the birth of this man in a town of Judea, of which this man Herod, that happens to be king, called Bethlehem. Bethlehem. And that's really kind of all we know about Jesus' origins. We have a general idea of where he was born, Bethlehem, which is near Jerusalem in Judea, the province he was born in, who his parents were, a general idea of the date, the year in which he was born. As you mentioned, Jerry, Mr. Cusano, you said December 25th. No, we kind of know the church made that decision to kind of take over pagan holidays. Just from what we can glean, kind of scrape away from the stories of what we know about the Middle East or the Near East, is that shepherds would not have been out with their flocks in the nighttime if it were cold. They generally wouldn't be. I'm not a Palestinian shepherd, as Caponegro, so I'm taking this on faith. So probably in the springtime when it were warmer. But then again, someone might say, well, that's what makes it so unusual, that they were out there with their flocks. Okay. But, I don't need it to be December 25th. It's like, there are some people who want to take the tradition so literally. The Bible doesn't say December 25th. It doesn't say give us a month. That's not the point. The point is that he was born. He was here now.
May I, it's not exactly apropos, but
That's fine.
of those groups, I'm trying to remember, Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, trying to remember which ones believed in the resurrection.
The Pharisees did. The Sadducees.
Were they the only?
I think the Essenes also did.
Okay.
The Essenes also
Just
did.
the Sadducees did not.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Sadducees, it was a later development within Judaism. There was still a question mark about a number of issues, the resurrection being one of them. That was not the only issue. But that's the issue that they questioned Jesus about. Now, I've been saying Judea, yes, Ms. Marshall Young, Judea, yes, Judea. I've been saying that, but now I'm going to throw you a curveball, Ms. Marshall Young. This will add a little bit, again, to the background of the story. Because this is Judea, okay, the area of the Jews, the Judaioi in Greek, or the Yehudim in Hebrew, okay? But the Romans didn't call it that. I mean, usually, like Gaul, Gallia in Latin, it's where the Gauls were, these ancient Celtic tribes. I say Celtic, I got you. If you want to say Celtic, God bless you, but Mr. Dunn's going to be cold and dead in his grave still saying Celtic. See, don't worry, I won't try to eat your brains, Miss Clary. I won't come after your brains. I'll be a Christian zombie, okay? Anyways, but what did the Romans call it? Like Gallia after the Gauls, Greece after the Greek. Well, they call it Graecia after the Graecia. Usually, they usually would name a place after the most prevalent group in the area. So why don't they call it Judea? What do they typically call this area? Anyone remember the PLO in modern
I was going to say Palestine.
Palestina, the area of the Philistines. Palestina. Palestina, the Philistines, or Philistines, depending on your pronunciation. It's okay. If I can say Celt, you can say Philistine or Philistine. I can go crazy. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't recall there being any Philistines for a long, long time in the 1st century AD or BC, even BC.
It was an Old Testament thing.
Yeah, there were Philistines during, David fought them, There was, they're mentioned in the Old Testament.
During the divided kingdom.
They were there. There were cities in southern Judah that, there are a number, I forget how many, there were 5, that were known as Philistine cities that the Jews could never really get them out of. So, they were always kind of there, but they weren't there. There were no Philistines there. I mean, maybe their ancestors were there calling themselves something else, but what do you think of that the Romans would call it after this ancient race that wasn't there anymore, but didn't call it after the Jews?
So after Palestina.
No, don't say after Palestina, just say Palestina. Why not Judea? That's where all the Jews were.
Perhaps because they didn't acknowledge the Jews. They didn't recognize them as people.
It was an insult. It was an insult. It's kind of even to today, for example. You better be very clear. If you're talking to a Palestinian Arab and you're getting on a plane to fly over to Israel, you better tell them you're going to Palestine. And vice versa. If you're talking to an Israeli Jew, you better say you're going to Israel. Because you can get into fights over these things. I remember I lived in Ireland for a year and studied abroad, and to go up to Northern Ireland. I went up there once. Beer was good. Didn't stay for very long.
Green orange.
Fine with me. Well, you know, they got places like, you know, the names are different. So you have Londonderry, which is what but in the Republic it's called Derry. But you better make sure once you cross that border into Northern Ireland, you call it Londonderry. You know, and you refer to things as they're supposed to be. And even your name, like, there are Catholic spellings of last names and Protestant spellings. So you can tell.
That's why I'm Murphy and Morris. I can
Why?
be Catholic and be a Murphy and be Protestant and be a Morris.
I just thought you were schizo.
I feel like I am. I think that's true.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, it's just that's the way, you know, where people go. You know, and also for example, I mean, you might have noticed I made the sign of the cross 3 times. I do that because I'm Eastern Catholic. You know, we're communion with Rome.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, we're Eastern.
Because I
We're
noticed the-
sometimes we say we're Orthodox Christians in communion with Rome. But I grew up Roman Catholic. I'm Irish, and then I transferred canonically with the approval of the Pope. So everything's fine. I'm Catholic. You know, we pray for the Pope more times than Catholics do, actually. You know, the Pope is prayed for like 5 times in an Eastern liturgy. You know, let us pray for the Holy Ecumenical Universal Pontiff Francis, Pope of Rome. You know, gets maybe 1 mention at the Catholic Mass in the Eucharistic prayer. Maybe during the general intercession. Yeah, maybe. Sometimes I noticed they started to do that. I wonder if there's some directive from the bishops about it. Maybe, but anyway, they're supposed to in the general intercessions. But
That's been since at least Vatican II,
yeah, what?
about praying for the Holy Father in the intercession.
Oh yeah.
That's at least from Vatican II.
Oh sure. Because they introduced it. But what I'm saying is like, no, and I agree with you. You're right. I'm saying is that in my travels, it's more often than, as they say, in the breach than in the observance, you know. It's only recently I've noticed the consistency with it. But it's nevertheless, it still doesn't equal like any Eastern church you go to. It doesn't matter if it's the Copts or, you know, the Syrians or Armenians, that they always pray for their bishops like 50 times. It's always, just in case the Lord might have forgotten in the last 10 minutes. Let's remind you, you know, Lord, you know, there was Bishop Bedros. Some of it's Armenian, I can't understand. Anyways, but yeah, in the Eastern Church, for example, our priest went to the Ukraine to live. He was an older gentleman, and he went back to the Ukraine to live and stuff like that. And that's how I grew up talking about it, the Ukraine. You know, it's the Ukraine, you know, the country of the Ukraine. Now it's the country of Ukraine. To me, it's just like talking about the Netherlands or the Philippines. I mean, it's a country. It makes not to Ukrainians. You know, that little definite article, will spark some kind of very intense debates, and you will be told by Ukrainians, it is not Ukraine, it is the Ukraine, it is not part of anything. It is Ukraine.
So they want the or not?
No,
They do not want because the presumes that it is part of something.
The Soviet Union,
Yeah. And they don't want that. And I could have argued with my priest and said, look, Father, you know, that's your issue. I'm an American. That was never my issue growing up. And I mean nothing by it. Nothing. It means it's the Ukraine, which is a country. And it is an area, actually. It is an area, but they're very touchy. And you can touch here with Russia starting to invade parts of their country. So there are parts of the world, even today, where names are issues. And same thing in Jesus' time. Okay, the Romans like to play games sometimes with the local populations and incite them. Okay, so Palestina. Jesus was born in Palestine. We know he was born apparently in Bethlehem. When I say no, that's of course relative. I wasn't there taking pictures. You know, but he said everyone agrees. All the Gospels agree that Jesus was from Bethlehem. I'm trying to think. Well, forget about that. They also agree that Jesus, however, in whatever way, we don't know because there are 2 different traditions about it in the Gospel of Matthew and one in the Gospel of Luke. But Jesus grew up in North Palestine, in the region of the Galilee. It's called Galilee. Again, in English, this is something you don't really get, but if you read the original Greek in the New Testament, it's always called with a definite article. It was a region, a part of Palestine. It was the Galilee. It was a northern region of Palestina. I'm trying to think. Statistically, probably the majority of people were Jews, but there was a heavy contingent of non-Jews living in the area. So it was a mixed populace. There were a number, there were towns on the seacoast, for example, that were not Jewish at all, majority Jewish, they were pagan. And Galilee was surrounded by the region of the 10 cities, which were all pagan. Okay, so, you have to remember, it wasn't all Jews that Jesus was, rubbing shoulders with, rubbing elbows with, or maybe bumping into in his journeys in Galilee, growing up. You can only imagine, you have to use your imagination, because who knows? I mean, like when I think of Jesus, I gotta imagine, there had to be cats in Capernaum, don't you think?
Had to be what?
There had to be cats in Nazareth,
Cats?
and Capernaum, places like that. Don't you think there were cats?
Cats.
You ever think about that?
Had they been brought over from Egypt?
Well, I mean,
Why do we care if there's cats?
why not?
Okay.
Well, it's called
I don't need to put that in my notes, is what you're saying.
No, but don't
You're
you
just
ever,
saying.
no, but don't you, well, what, Don't you ever meditate on the scriptures and try to put yourself in, like,
No
the
pets.
smells?
No pets.
There were no pets.
Petting a dog, but I do lament that there's nowhere in the gospel suggesting that Jesus laughed, enjoyed jokes, or anything.
Oh, he did, yeah.
I'm sure he did.
No, he did.
Oh.
There's at least one joke I can point to of Jesus. And certainly Jesus, when it talks about Jesus looking at the man with love, with Jesus in the Gospel of Mark taking a child and wrapping his arms around the child, I'm not going to assume that Jesus was like,
Right.
I'm going to assume that Jesus maybe had a little grin. I don't know. No, but I get you. Jesus, why didn't Jesus smile? Maybe because he had to deal with people all the time.
No, I'm sure, no, I'm
Somebody
sure,
didn't eat.
no, I'm sure he smiled quite a bit because of the joy in his ministry. But I'm talking about something, and the Lord, when Peter said, hey, Lord, check this out. There was a priest, a minister, and a rabbi went into a bar,
But it's the way the books were written too.
Oh, of course.
We're talking about the authors, but that's not how
Well, it had
stories
nothing-
were written.
Well,
right?
it had nothing to
So-
do with salvation history anyway.
Right.
It wasn't important.
I don't know that humor has nothing to do with salvation history. I'm not sure about that. I think there is a sort of humor in, there's a sort of, maybe you call it macabre humor. But anyways, okay, well, that's an interesting question. There's something that's coming to me.
Born in Palestine, Bethlehem grows up northern Palestine. That's where we left off.
I got you.
And was there cats?
And then I talked about cats and
Right.
you left me.
Sorry, I didn't, I'm right here.
No, but did you ever think, that's part of, I'm adding a spiritual element. That's, your sister can verify this, like when you're in the monastery and stuff. It's part of Lectio Divina. Divine, you meditate on the scriptures and you're supposed to put yourself into the smells, the heat, the smell. For example, think of this. Do you think Jesus smelled good?
No, those guys did not. Those guys smelled like garbage.
Do you think Jesus looked good?
I would imagine he probably, well, I don't know. How well did they groom back then? Who knows?
They
He was
did
homeless.
groom.
He was
People did
homeless,
groom.
but he was homeless.
No, that's not totally true. Because he did have a home base in Capernaum. And he had a lot of people, remember Martha and Mary and Lazarus, he had
No,
people who would
that's
take
true.
him into his home. He wasn't completely homeless.
That's true.
But he was on the move, if that's what you mean,
Well,
you're
that's
right.
right. When he had a base he could go back to, but for the most part, he was on the road.
But Jesus, his group, they're moving around all the time in a hot environment.
I would say, did
Sweaty,
Jesus take care of himself? I would say yes, because he, of course, would have known himself as a temple of the Holy Spirit. He would have taken care of what the Father had given him.
Yeah, and as a Jew, I don't even have to go theologically,
Well,
just simply as a Jew,
cleansings as a
just
Jew.
culturally, yeah,
Right.
yeah, doing body washing.
But did those guys smell like a bed of roses? Hell no.
No,
Oh no.
good breath, good teeth.
No. How often did they bathe?
Then why do we always show Jesus in these movies like he's beautiful?
I agree.
He's beautiful.
I agree. And he's white. Did you know that?
He's certainly Caucasian.
Yeah. Oh, he must have been.
Caucasian.
He must have been.
Jerry.
What? No. I am being sarcastic.
But was he male?
That's
you know,
gutsy.
for all you know, he was a psychedelic mushroom, this clearing.
Wow.
Was he there? Whoa.
No,
Anyway,
you know, and I've often joked about that, you know, he's always seen as this muscular, macho kind of guy. Then what if we get there and we find out he was an 80-pound-a-week lady? You know?
why do you think so many people didn't like him?
Why? Because his message was radical.
You think so?
It was, he was a threat to, well, first of all, he was a threat
Do
to,
you think Jesus was really threatening? Because you're just talking about Jesus being, you know, maybe he was just an 80-pound weakling. Why would anyone? Because Jesus
of the
is not
message.
mentioned, I mean,
Because of-
Josephus mentions him once, actually twice, once in passing and one little section, and Pontius Pilate didn't seem to be, Pontius Pilate didn't even know who the heck he was.
no, Pilate, well, you know,
People couldn't pick him out of a crowd, like Herod Philip, Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas kept wanting to see Jesus, because he kept hearing about him. You know, there are stories where...
But yet he had followers.
Sure,
He had
followers.
He had crowds.
He had crowds.
Now, was Jesus
Did he
the
have
only?
crowds,
Well,
actually?
you know, he had the 5,000, not counting women and children. We're told that John tells
Really?
us that.
Really?
Well, John said that, did he not?
Well, John has a story about that. It's about we're assuming they're telling us the truth and they're not being hyperbolic.
Well, but even,
You know, a couple of people, I mean, it might,
yeah,
like,
5,000 didn't even include women and
like
children.
everybody showed up!
Right, yeah. But, look, was Jesus the only preacher going around that day that had a following? No. No. But,
Perhaps not, perhaps
no,
not.
I think it's a
Perhaps
fairly
not.
good, right, but I think it's a fairly
We
good.
know of a few other people who were around doing stuff.
But the radical nature of Jesus' message,
Really?
that it wasn't radical?
What was so radical? Well, why did
He wasn't preaching military might.
he wasn't?
Preaching the opposite.
Then why did they carry weapons?
Who?
Jesus and his followers.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Read the Gospel of Luke, remember, Jesus is talking about, they're talking to his disciples, and Peter said, but here's Jesus, here we have 2 swords. And Jesus simply says, it's enough.
You're talking about when he was arrested?
No. But they had, where did they get the weapons from? They had them already, apparently.
I don't know, maybe they needed them for protection.
Possible.
Or to get food.
What would you think if you were a Roman soldier? I'm sorry, Ms. Caponegro, what did you say?
Or to get food.
Or to get food.
But if you're, let's say you're a soldier who's patrolling, and you see this group of guys, you know, and then some of them have weapons, what are you gonna think?
Well,
Not knowing the society as well as you may, I'm wondering, did all the men carry a weapon?
Ms. Caponegro, let me tell you something. I've never been there.
I haven't either, but
No,
I'm
no,
just
no,
saying,
but-
I don't know, I haven't studied the history.
But I
What I
think
mean is, I wasn't even there when Jesus was there. I've never met the man.
Understood,
So, but I'm telling you all this stuff about a person I've never met.
understood.
But I'm thinking that maybe
But don't put so much stock in me than I deserve, more
Okay.
stock than I deserve.
perhaps the soldiers knew them. They knew-
Perhaps they did, Jerry, but Jerry, think about it. You're a Roman soldier,
Right.
okay? Your life is on the line, you could be
Right.
killed at any moment, okay? You're
Yeah, but
here.
they were
at-
armed too.
Sure, but you're in a region where people do not like you because you are occupying,
Right,
okay?
right,
And soldiers have been killed before,
right.
and here's this dude traipsing around with a whole group of guys, getting perhaps more groups of people, and they're all walking around with little swords. And, you know, he's talking about the end of the world and the kingdom of God, and
I'm
not
just
the
thinking-
kingdom of
No, but I'm just
Rome.
thinking that these pagan Romans are thinking he's no big deal because what he's talking about is poppycock. There's no
Really?
such thing. He's not talking about military might.
Okay,
I could be of course I could be very
But-
wrong, but that's where my mind is going. with
you
that.
could be wrong, you could be right, but at the end of the day, you have to have some evidence to hang it on, because otherwise it's just smoke.
Granted.
Smoke. And remember how Jesus was crucified. He was not crucified between 2 robbers. That is a mistranslation.
What was it?
Leistes, in New Testament Greek, was a bandit, a thief on the road,
Right,
or revolutionary.
right.
Okay, Okay, so think of how Jesus,
How's that different from Robert?
see, because it had the texture of overthrowers. These were not people who were simply mugging you. They were killing, they were there to kind of, like the Zealots, they were there to kind of overthrow things. Okay, so there's a reason why Jesus kind of gets mixed up with stuff. And remember, the reason Jesus, all Pontius Pilate heard and needed to hear was that Jesus was declaring he was a king of some sort. Pontius Pilate didn't give a hoot and a holler about Jesus claiming he was the Son of God or whatever. Forget about the Gospel of John for a moment, which I personally believe makes more sense. The conversation between Jesus and Pilate makes a lot more sense. But for the synoptics, he heard Jesus. Did you say you're a king? Well, that's all he wants. That's all he cares about. So are you a king? That's all Pilate and the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, wants to know about Jesus.
So that's what,
So
okay.
it's challenging his position.
No, it's going to get him in trouble with Herod.
Okay.
No, it's going to get him in trouble with the Romans. The Romans didn't give a, as I said, they didn't give a, Jesus was preaching, well, they didn't care who he's preaching. If he's teaching that he's a ruler, then no, you are not, and we'll show you. There's the cross, my friend. If you haven't seen it before, you're going to see it now. And the Pontius Pilate and the Romans needed absolutely no reason, very little reason, I should say no reason, because there was Roman justice. But they didn't need a lot of reason to crucify someone. And sometimes they would simply, and this was one of the reasons Pilate was hated amongst the Jews. He would crucify hundreds of Jews. So many Jews, and he would put the crosses all on the roads to Jerusalem, simply to show them who was in charge.
So then why was Pilate, according to the gospel, why was Pilate anxious to let him go?
I don't know. I just know that the reason he crucified Jesus was because Jesus claimed to be king. And all of the four Gospels, as different as they are, and I know Matthew and Luke were based on Mark, but even John agrees with that. They all agree on the title, the charge over the head of Jesus. This is your king. See what we did to him. So don't, okay? So northern Palestine, the town of Nazareth, I say city, but it was, I guess it was a large town, but anyways, I'm just rambling, sorry. The town of Nazareth, Ms. Murphy Morris. Okay, that's where Jesus grew up. How he got to northern Palestine from Bethlehem, in an era where people didn't seem to move around that much. But apparently, maybe some people did, but I don't know. But I'm making an assumption here, it doesn't seem. But nevertheless, Jesus and his family trekked all the way up to this town, and they set up shop. Maybe literally. Joseph doing a little bit of home renovation. Now let's see what we got here. The name of, and I'm giving you some background information, like the name of Jesus. Jesus, his name, although we know it in English and Latin.
Yeshua.
Yes, it is Yeshua. There are two forms of the name. There's Yeshua, which is the Aramaic form. When I show you, get the PowerPoint up, you can see it. Yeshua, but really the traditional form from Hebrew is Yehoshua. Yehoshua. And sometimes you'll hear that the Aramaic form is a shortened form, Yeshua, but you have to be careful when people try to make connections between Aramaic and Hebrew. They're related languages, and like any related language, there are changes that develop. It's simply Yeshua. It's not necessarily a shortened form of Yehoshua. It's simply the word for, Jesus in Aramaic, but we say Jesus. But I'll tell you what it means. It really means, because it's another name that we know it by. And there was a book written by some dude back in the 90s.
Yes, Joshua.
Yeah. I never read it. I wasn't into it.
I did read them. Joseph Gersone was his name.
Oh, okay.
He was a retired priest. And they were, did you ever read them?
No.
The Joshua books?
No.
They were sappy and they were not high literature by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, they were very easy to read, but it really was, in my opinion, it was This priest, because he was retired, so I guess he felt he was able to write these things, his ideas really of what the church should be,
Sure.
in terms of its relationship with Jesus. That really is what I...
Mr. Cusano, since the even before that, the 1700s, that has not changed. All the lives of Jesus that were in their own image. And that's not my opinion. Well, it is my opinion, because I agree with it. But I actually got that as a very famous quote that you might come across. Let me just make sure this is recording. Hello, Mr. Trillo. Sorry that all the power went off. One of those nights. And you'll have to get the notes from somebody. God bless you, sir. Okay. George Terrell. He was a priest. He was also excommunicated as a heretic by the Catholic Church, so he died excommunicate. Unfortunately, I can't go into the whole reason why, but anyways, he was an English Jesuit. And but anyways, he yeah, you never know with the Jesuits. I was in the seminary for a couple of years. Whenever we had this one Jesuit, Edward Yarnall, teach us. Apparently, he was some bigwig from English guy, bigwig on like sacraments. Maybe you've seen some of his books, Yarnall, big on baptism. He's written expert on baptismal stuff. Anyways, we always used to joke with him. I didn't say this because I didn't want to offend him, but other seminaries would say, "Well, we're a Catholic seminary, Father. We're not Jesuits." And he'd always get this little grin. I don't know if he took it the right way. Yes, but anyways, the Jesuits. Anyway, I wasn't
It's like the joke of saying that somebody, let's say this guy is confused as a Jesuit during Holy Week.
Well, that's back when I think, as you know, with the liturgy, it was much more complicated. Anywho, so what were we talking about? George Terrell, he was an English Jesuit. He was excommunicated, unfortunately. Some people might have said he was forward-thinking, and whatever, but that's a whole other cup of coffee. He had a great quote, because he was a theologian. He was not a Bible scholar, but he, was looking at, in the 1800s, anyone with the Bible started writing all these stories of what they thought Jesus was like. They're called the lives of Jesus, everybody. Most of them were biblical scholars, and, some of them were good, some of them were based on maybe what they call scientific methods and stuff. Others were simply, as you say, saccharine, sweet and stuff, and George Terrell read some of these, and he said, read these lives of Jesus, and really what it is the scholar looks down, it's like a scholar looking down a deep well, and in the water below, he sees a pale reflection of himself. Because every Jesus created, concocted by these scholars, seemed to be exactly what the scholar was. Kantian philosopher, skeptic, cynic, emotional, rigid. Well, no one ever said Jesus was that rigid. End of the world type person, prophet, all this stuff. Never the Jesus of the church, though. Never the Jesus of the church. I can't think of anyone who ever came up and said, I read the Gospels, and you know what? It is the Jesus the church is preaching to me. It was always like, no, the church has to go. The church is wrong. We have to get back to the Gospels and pick away all the incrustations that the church has added and find the real Jesus of Nazareth. And it worked so well, Ms. Caponegro, Ms. Marshall Young, Ms. Cleary, that by the 1900s, many of them had just simply lost the faith and said, let's stop doing this. And there was a big collapse in the lives of Jesus. We didn't have it for like another 50 years because people were just like, we don't know nothing. So, you drive, come on. Uh-oh. You drive is gone now. Wonderful. Well, okay, I got it on my USB. It's just been a night of surprises. Let's see here. Okay. There we go. Okay. The disc. maybe you have to search through the whole thing probably to find it again. Which one did I want to use? I think I want to use this one. Okay. And I love that image of the Shroud of Turin. Yes, I know people think it's probably fake, but nevertheless, very interesting, you know? Because this is what people think of with the Shroud of Turin, isn't it? This is the thing you see on holy cards and stuff like that. You don't see this. Why? No one focuses on that, which is the actual shroud, the actual image. Why? Because if you ever went to Turin, and I've never gone to Turin, but I've seen pictures of the actual shroud and pictures of people venerating and stuff. It's almost invisible. It's like a buttery schmear. You smear butter on a piece of cloth. It's hardly visible because it's a burn, is really what the image is. It's apparently just the first topmost layer of the fabric, which has a light burn on it. It's not painted on, that's clear, because scientists have examined it. There's no evidence of paint. So no one's even really touched it, which unfortunately, today, with an artifact, you leave something alone. People didn't do that in the Middle Ages, ever see that little Our Lady, Mexicans holding up a picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe and stuff. I think they've painted like all over that. The original artifact might not even be, you can't even get to it anymore. But the shroud, they were able to leave alone, mainly because no one cared about it. It was stuck for centuries in a cupboard in what's called a sacristy. It's the room where the priest gets ready for Mass. And it's forgotten until they had a fire. And so they got burned and people, oh yeah, we got that, and we got it out and stuff like that. So got water, they threw water all over it and damaged it. They ruined parts of it. Of course, it got burned. People have this weird thing that they think that the church has always been like, this is a relic of Jesus. This is evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. If it was, the church wasn't carrying it around, trumpeting it for a long, long time. It was treated really kind of how Jesus was treated by his followers, Like it says in the Gospels, they all left him and fled. It's weird because you'd think if you had this real artifact from the tomb, they would. So it's burned on, you can barely see it. You can see the blood stains better than that. And the blood stains have not been painted as well. That's another thing. You say, well, have they been daubed on? No, you can tell that they're from the way that they're, the way the liquid paint, that has been pushed on. It's an original stain from something. Some body had to be pressed to it. And this is what people think of, that it's really a photo negative. You have to see it this way to see the image. This way you don't come away with any image, do you? Not much. You can make out something. Okay, maybe the body of a man, back and front. Okay? This is the image, which I always forget the guy's name, some Italian dude, in the late 1800s, just took a picture of the shroud when it was on display. He had absolutely no idea what was going to come from it until he looked at the negative. He was just taking a picture of the shroud that was on display. Nothing, just going about his business. Develops the negatives and he's like, whoa! So if you're the creator of this artifact, I wonder how you knew about 700 years before, because a lot of scholars date it to around 1200s. How you knew hundreds of years before that the best way to see your image, unless it's a total accident, it could be a total accident, but nevertheless to paint the image in such a way that it would be best seen as a negative. Weird. But it's just interesting. It's fast. Stuff like this fascinates them. Okay, and people are still trying to study it. Scott, I put it this way: if scientists and people who are like physicists and work for NASA are fascinated by it, then it must be fascinating. There's something about it, even if it is a fake. It's really, really interesting. So Jesus, this is here. I did you. Oh no, I didn't give it to you on here. All right. Well, anyways, I'll give it forward. Yeshua. Okay. In case you don't know, Hebrew was a dead language during the time of Jesus, much as it was a dead language for the last 2,000 years until Jews revived it. That's a U. Make that a better U. Okay? People did not speak Hebrew in the days of Jesus. In the synagogue, yes, scriptures were written in Hebrew, but nobody understood Hebrew anymore. It was a dead language. It was classical biblical Hebrew, much like Latin today. If we still use Latin at Mass, 99% of the people, except some nerd like me, would not know what was going on. It was a dead language. People do speak Latin, but they speak it in modern terms. Italian, if you really want to hear modern Latin, it's Italian. And if you want to hear the closest thing to what Latin sounded like when it started making a change, you want to learn Sardinian. Sardinians have a very ancient form of Italian. It's very different from Italian. French, Spanish, Portuguese, these are all forms of Latin that are still spoken today. Same thing with the Jews. Hebrew died out, but people spoke a very similar type of language called Aramaic at the time of Jesus, which was different enough from Hebrew that you couldn't necessarily understand the Hebrew. Okay? You could maybe figure out some of the words, but the Hebrew that was being used in the reading of the scriptures in a synagogue during Jesus' day would have been the classical biblical kind. And so what they would do is, after they would have the reading, they would have some guy come up who could understand, or at least had learned what was being read that day, had been told. And then in the local language of Aramaic, the language that everyone spoke, or if you're outside of Palestine, in Greek, would give you an interpretation of the reading. So unless you had actually taken instruction from a rabbi, which not all boys did. You did take instruction from the rabbi about the Jewish faith, but only if maybe you were a particularly precocious, intelligent young boy. The rabbi might take you aside and say, "Do you want to know more?" And maybe groom you for the rabbinate, as they say, to become a teacher as well. But certainly the priests in the temple would have some knowledge of Hebrew, because all the prayers and the songs they would be singing from the Psalms in the Bible and other songs that we don't know of would have been in the Hebrew language. The worship of the temple was in the Hebrew language. Interesting. I guess they hadn't had Vatican II yet. Sorry, you didn't hear that, sister. I'm all on board with Vatican II. Nothing wrong here. Everything is just like beautiful. And all the reasons for getting rid of sacred languages make perfect sense. Except that they don't once you study religion. Because you find that every religion has sacred languages. Hindu temple, mosque, and even the Jews today, even the liberal Jews, the Reformed Jews, have recovered Hebrew because they found that they were losing something. And you can go to even the most liberalist of liberal Jewish temples, and now someone will still explain it to you and probably read you the reading in English or Spanish or Brazil or Portuguese, wherever there might be a Jewish community, so you understand the reading, which like in the old days they would have the Latin reading and then they would have the priest read it or the deacon read it in English. But if you go to an Orthodox synagogue, good luck. Good luck. They ain't translating it for you. It's all in Hebrew. The best you might get to a translation is someone asking you in Yiddish when the service is over. And all you gotta know, Jerry, if you go to, all you gotta know, goy. That's all you, goy, yep. Don't say goyim, you're singular. Goy, goya, goya. And certainly if you're a woman, don't touch anything, please. Certainly not the men. Do not touch them. Because you're not their wife. Anyways, but you don't have to worry about that necessarily. Unless you go to Israel, and some of the Hasidim might try to stone you if you do that. Things are different in Israel. I don't think they put that on the commercial that I've seen on it. Things are different in Israel. drive your car on the Sabbath and get a few dent marks from stones. Anyways, so Yehoshua and Yeshua, both of these terms, and excuse me, thank you, Jerry, Joshua, okay? We have it as Latin as Jesus, but Joshua is the Greek form, okay? So true or false, there is a book of Jesus in the Bible. A book of, which would be what? No, you're right, you don't need to check it. Which would be what? Which would be what?
Which could be Jesus.
Could be, it is the book of Jesus. It's the book of Jesus. Joshua means Jesus. Jesus means Joshua. They're exactly the same, just different languages.
Okay, hold on. Then-
See, I'm just wondering.
When was it
Is
written?
this the first time I've heard this?
Then when,
When
well,
was
it's
the-
not, Joshua's not a prophet.
Joshua is a prophet. Isn't he called a prophet? I believe he's called a prophet.
When was the prophet Joshua?
I'll look that up. I see you're testing my memory because Joshua, I think, I'll have to look it up. And if he was
The
called a
book of
prophet or
Joshua
not.
derives its name from the successor of Moses.
No?
I'm reading it.
You're reading
Oh,
something
God
wrong.
bless you, woman. Okay.
Hold on a second.
No, he was given a name by Moses. Yes, you're right. But it does not derive from Moses. It means
It's among the historical
There was
books.
the First Testament,
the First Testament what?
or classified as the Old Testament.
Yes.
So how could that be a book pertaining?
To Jesus.
Right. I mean,
Because
all
I'm blowing
people-
your mind.
Oh,
Jesus
okay.
fought the battle of Jericho.
Trying to follow.
You're following. Keep going. Keep going.
Okay, but I mean, Isaiah talked about Jesus coming, and we know that now because we're in an era where we can read back into
Okay, good. I
Old
see.
Testament.
Sure.
But how?
How could there be a book of Jesus?
Yeah.
It's not the one we're thinking of, it's just another Jesus.
Exactly. Jesus was not, the name Jesus was not unique to him. It was as common amongst Jews as maybe the name.
You get a star, Bernadette.
Huh?
So Bernadette gets a star.
Oh, she's got a few gold stars already.
Nice
She's
job.
got a few gold stars. And because she's checking it up, she's not looking over at you, like you sleeping.
I am not sleeping, sir. I am not. Just taking it all in.
Just
Come
like
on.
Mary's name was common.
I know, I'm just messing.
I know.
This happens.
I-
Sorry.
It's okay.
Yes. Jesus was a common, listen, Jesus was a common name, okay? Names like Jesus. So he was not the first Jesus, okay? He was in the history of Judaism, the history of the Jews. There was a Jesus before named Jesus or Joshua. I mean, if you read, the name Jesus in Greek, here it is. Jesus' name in Greek is Jesus. This is a long E, S-O-U-S, okay? Jesus. And it means Joshua, okay? The book of Joshua, the book of Jesus. There's no difference between the names. We only have a difference in our English Bibles because we have preferred the Latin Jesus over the Greek Joshua. But if you took the book of Joshua, Moses' friend, it was before Jesus by centuries, okay? Probably over 1,000 years, okay? Lived before Jesus, okay? If you took the book of Joshua and changed every Joshua into Jesus, that's fine. Because you just changed it into the Latin word, you understand? Okay? There's a common name amongst Jews. There's nothing unique about Jesus of Nazareth having the name Yeshua. Nothing. Okay? He was not the first. He was not the only. We know this because there was a dude who was a criminal. Remember Barabbas, okay? Who people usually know him as by Barabbas in the stories, but really his full name was Jesus Barabbas. Jesus Barabbas, the guy who was. So you can imagine how, for a Christian, you have Jesus, who is the Son of God, who is exchanged for this man, Jesus Barabbas.
Yeah, but he was actually, the guy was a sorcerer of some sort or something, right? Barabbas, I'm trying to remember the story of him.
No, that's nowhere in the Gospels. Don't mix. There might be later legends about Barabbas, but do not mix them with the Gospel. All the Gospels say was that he was a revolutionary, committed murder, and he was going to be crucified. But he's exchanged for Jesus. Let me blow your mind even more.
Please don't.
Yeshua Barabbas. In Aramaic, his name is Yeshua Barabbas. Barabbas means son of the Father. Jesus, son of the Father, was released. Jesus, the Father's Son, was sent to be crucified. If you're a Christian, you look at that and you're like, oh, the real Son of the Father is crucified and killed. Anyway, so the book of Joshua, if you read early commentaries amongst Christians who knew Greek and spoke Greek, do not think that they did not notice that Jesus was the same name that Jesus had. And so they would interpret the book of Joshua with all the symbolism relating it to events in the life of Jesus of Nazareth. Not accurately, of course. I mean, as you said, they're creating this, but based on the fact of the name. The name is the same. Okay? Jesus' name comes from a Hebrew word which means that God saves, or the word saves. The root of the name Yehoshua is save, Savior. So God saves. God, it could also be translated as God is my Savior. There are variants of this name. There are other people who are named Jesus as well, have the same name, but different ways. So you have, for example, Hosea, the prophet Hosea, also sometimes spelled Hoshea. There's a king Hoshea as well. Okay? Same thing, same root. Yehoshea. Okay? You just drop the Yeho from it. The name of God. So it's the same name. So it was not like you have prophets named Yehoshua, prophet Hosea. You have a whole book about Joshua, son of Nun, okay, who's also Jesus. And then, of course, you have Jesus of Nazareth. So it's not an uncommon name. Okay? So, Jesus had no last name. He was just Jesus. As with many ancient peoples, you were known by other ways. You had to be known by other ways. Because you had a given name, and then people would just add on to that. They'll give you your family name. So, Jesus is sometimes called Jesus, the son of Joseph. Yeah. You'd be known by your father. Although there is one peculiar instance where Jesus is known by Mary, his mother. It's extremely weird. Because no man, even if a man had no sons, you would never be known by a daughter or something. You would never, even if you were just daughters, you would never be known by your mother. You would always be known by your father. It's a very weird thing. But anyway, so Jesus, you'd be known by your father's name, Joseph, or by your profession, Jesus the carpenter. Jesus is called the carpenter. He's the carpenter. From where you were, Jesus of Nazareth. You're from Nazareth. Jesus the Nazarene is one of the common ways that Jesus is referred to. He comes from Nazareth. So again, the fact that he's even called Jesus of Nazareth gives you an idea of where he grew up. From information we know about him, he was a tectone, which, yes, most people will translate and say it was a carpenter, but it was a broader term than a carpenter. A tectone. It really referred to anyone who was a laborer. So could Jesus have been building, little chairs and tables for people? Sure, could have been. But he also could have been carrying, clay bricks on his back, building homes and fixing homes. And, a tectone was something that was more generalized than simply like a general contractor. You did a lot of stuff. You were a handyman in a sense. Pipes burst, you have to fix them. The lights go out, you have to fix them. Bricks fall out of the wall, you have to make some more bricks and put them back in the wall, stuff like that. And yes, also, you might have to build a chair or two for people. So you could call him a carpenter, but it's more a handyman is a better way to describe his job. He begins his ministry around 30 years of age, as we've already discussed. It is a ministry, a service he provides, a work that he does of teaching, healing, and exorcism of Mark 10:47 is where he's, where did I put 10:47 for? Oh, where he's called the Nazarene. Nazarene, so that's in the earliest gospel. There's a reference, this is the Nazarene, you know. Not even from Nazareth, but he's referred to specifically as, oh, the Nazarene, oh yeah, that guy, you know. It's, you know. People usually forget about the exorcism. That was a big part of Jesus' ministry. People remember the teaching and the healing. Has anyone read the Gospel of Mark? Or read it now? How much teaching is in it?
Not a whole lot.
No, not a whole lot. I mean, most of the teaching in Mark's Gospel is grouped around the end, where Jesus is going to Jerusalem, in Jerusalem. But before that, it's mainly miracle stories. Jesus doing healings and casting out demons. The teaching Jesus that you see in the movies and stuff of Jesus going around telling stories and stuff like that it's really, you know, you want to look to the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, and to another extent John. A few years ago they made, I guess, one of the few, if not the only, movies based on the Gospel of John. Most of the movies that I've seen, Franco Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth, King of Kings, Greatest Story Ever Told, stuff like that, and others.
The ugliest Jesus ever.
Weird eyes.
Weird and old looking.
Yeah, really a creep factor.
Yeah.
It was bad. I don't know what they were thinking when they chose, but
The
anyway.
worst movie ever made.
But I didn't really like Max von Sydow either. You know, and even Franco Zeffirelli's Jesus was he's a good actor, but he's pretty. He was a pretty.
Robert Powell, yeah, all the women loved him.
Yeah, he's a nice looking guy. Only Jesus I thought maybe was interesting was like Jesus Christ Superstar. Because the guy had kind of a lazy eye, you know, he wasn't perfect. You know, he had kind of but all the other Jesus, I haven't found one Jesus that I've seen, even like, you know, Scorsese with Willem Dafoe, you know, it was all guys who had, like, watch Willem Dafoe. And it's perfect teeth in The Last Temptation of Christ. Beautiful teeth.
Blue eyes.
Always beautiful.
Although in the Passion of the Christ,
Yes.
I found he might have been a little closer, perhaps.
You think so?
Maybe. Certainly they gave him the nose.
Okay.
They gave him the
We
nose.
might be getting into stereotypes there, though.
Well.
Not all Jews have certain, I mean, you gotta remember something, the Jews of today are not the Jews of 2,000 years ago.
No, well,
There's
that's
been a
true.
lot of
That's
ethnic
true.
change.
Right. But they made him look a little more Middle Eastern.
Okay, I got
A
you.
little more Middle Eastern than,
But again, you have to be careful with that because you're falling into the trap that the lives of Jesus people fell in. Those books that I talked about,
right?
very few of them ever traveled to the Middle East. And those that did found Arabs. Arabs were not in Palestine 2,000 years ago. The Arabian Peninsula, yes.
Right.
Okay, remember, that's where the tribes were of Muhammad, and that we now today call Arabs. They did not move up into the region of what we call the Near East until the invasions of the 600s during the 7th century, during the life of Muhammad.
So
that was a mistake that they made.
In the 8th century.
They were not wearing, you know, the
So who
Jesus that you
was-
see with
so
the
who
long
was-
flowing robes, who looks
That's
like an
fine.
Arab merchant.
So who were
No.
the Semites that were there? Where did they originally come from?
Well, do you want the Bible's explanation?
Or
do you-
I want the scientific explanation.
Well,
I just wanna get to
there is
slide
no
3.
scientific.
We get to slide 3. Yeah. It's just a little wandery. That's my body language. It's just really hard.
I don't see that, but okay.
They were somewhere from the ancient Near East, probably the Iraq region and Egypt, probably from northern Egypt.
Okay.
But none of them was from, none of them, I know, it sounds great to say, oh yeah, we'll just go to Israel and find a real Jew person, or we'll find an Arab or someone who looks like that. 2,000 years have passed, and a lot of history has intervened, and the culture that was there during the time of Jesus is not the culture of even a few hundred years ago.
So the description in Revelations, which is the only place that I know that describes what I thought was Jesus, which is bronze feet, white wool hair.
So Jesus was white?
No, I didn't say
So
his
white
skin color was white, I said his hair, according to.
And he saw ghosts. I got you. You have to remember, Ms. Marshall Young, that the book of Revelation, it's one revelation, even though it does contain a series of revelations, but it's one book, so singular. John is having visions. So a vision is very personal. I would not take anything that he's describing about this, and he doesn't, does he say it's Jesus, or does he say it's the Word of God? Yeah, he's having visions, okay? There is no description of Jesus in the Bible at all.
I was gonna say,
It is a
there
very-
really isn't.
Other than he was a man, he was a male human being, okay, and certain things, and we know nothing else because it was not the purpose. The purpose, Ms. Murphy Morris,
Yes.
was that this
Slide
man,
3.
that this man who was born in Bethlehem, who lived in Nazareth, and now started this ministry, there's a Freudian slip, was the long-awaited Christ, the Messiah of the Jews. And that's what Christ means, an anointed one. That's what Messiah means, anointed one. The Hebrew word Mashiach means to have oil poured over you. That's all it means. And in the case of the Jews, the kings, when they were made kings, had oil poured all over their body, in addition to dressing them in the garb of kings. If anyone has ever seen, you probably won't ever see this again, depending on what Charles III does when he becomes Charles III. But in England, when Elizabeth was made Elizabeth II of England, they televised her consecration as Queen of England. It was, I believe, the first time that they had televised something in color on British television on the BBC. Which kind of tells you something about how far we even outpaced that, because it was the 1950s and we already had color TVs in America. But I digress. That's part of the ceremony of becoming the monarch of England. The Archbishop of Canterbury. I don't think the Archbishop does it personally. I think there's someone, an assistant, who pours a big jug, a flask of oil all over the monarch's head, which they did to Elizabeth. However, they did not televise it on the BBC because it was considered such a sacred moment that they felt that somehow it was belittled by showing it over television. Interesting. Now, the Anglicans and the English monarch, the British monarchy, are not getting this from nowhere. They're getting it from the Bible, okay? I know there are some British Israelites that like to believe that the British monarchy derives from Jesus and hence from King David, but that's a whole conspiracy theory. If you want to know more about that, you can watch the 3 movies with Tom Hanks, the Da Vinci Code series, which is all based on this ridiculous idea that somehow the French monarchy and the British monarchy all derive from Israel's monarchy, King David. Well, that's nonsense. No offense, but it's nonsense. It makes very interesting movies, but it doesn't have a lot of factual basis behind it. They're imitating the Bible, where it describes that when the kings of Israel were installed in their office, they had oil poured over them. Other people had oil poured over them as well, such as priests and prophets. Kings, priests, and prophets in Israel were installed in their position. Okay? Jesus was claiming to be these. Jesus is called a prophet. Jesus is called a priest. Or excuse me, not a priest. Later on, he's described as a priest by Christians, even though he had no priestly lineage. But mainly, Jesus goes around talking about this kingdom that he is bringing, which people assume, well, what are you then? Are you some sort of king? And for the Jews, the only king they were expecting was a king in the line of David who had, by the time of Jesus, become this kind of end-of-the-world figure. He was going to come, establish the kingdom of God again, reestablish the kingdom of David, establish the law of Moses again, defeat all the enemies of Israel, and there would be peace forever. I don't know about the enemies of Israel, whether that meant they were going to live peacefully. I don't know. After the Messiah slit all their throats. I don't know. But certainly for the people of Israel, they would be living forever. This is supposed to be a forever monarchy. So the fact that Jesus never says, hey, I am Jesus Christ. That's not the name he calls himself. His followers start using this terminology or asking questions. This question comes up. Okay, it's only when Jesus is finally confronted by Pontius Pilate, or excuse me, not Pontius Pilate, by the high priest, who was like the Pope. I mean, the Jews had the equivalent of a Pope. The high priest was considered to speak for God directly. And the high priest could make decisions for Jews around the world. He could bind Jews in their practice of the law all over the world. All over the world, he had that authority. So when the high priest, Jesus comes before the high priest, and the high priest says, I ask you under oath. So he's now placing Jesus before God. Oaths were a very serious business. There are all sorts of rules about oaths in the law of Moses. They're a very serious business. So he places Jesus under oath to tell me if you are the Messiah. And that's the only time Jesus will say, I am. Other times he's kind of like, well, you're saying it, He hems and haws a little bit. But when the high priest kind of puts him on the rack and says, no more games, Jesus. I ask you before God. You know who I am. I want to know who you are. Is that what you're claiming? And when Jesus says yes, they all celebrated. Hava, Nagila, Nagila, hoopa. Well, that's Greek, isn't hoopa Greek? I can't tell you. No, that's not what the high priest wants to hear. So Jesus, it is a title for Jesus, the Christ. The Christ. Notice it's not Jesus Christ, it's really Jesus the Christ, the anointed one, the Messiah. And it's an add-on to Jesus. It expresses the later belief of his followers about who they had come to believe he was and what they believed was proven by the events, especially the resurrection. The fact that God raised Jesus from the dead was a confirmation for Jesus' followers who thought he was a failure. They thought he would, that was the end of it. Jesus pooped out. It was a good run, the whole Jesus thing. But Jesus got killed and that was the end of it. So if you read the gospel stories, all of his followers, they go home. Peter, for example, goes back to fishing. They're not out there spreading a message about Jesus. Jesus was gone. Memories, yes. But they weren't going out and spreading those memories to other people, saying, hey, you got to believe this. Because it was nonsense that the Messiah should die like this. If you talk to an Hasidic Jew today, that's one of the first arguments they'll say, is that why Jesus was not Mashiach? Because God would not have allowed his Messiah to die such a shameful death. It's proof that he's not the Messiah. On the other end of the spectrum is Murphy Morris. If you talk to a Muslim will tell you Jesus was the Messiah. Of course Jesus was the Christ. And because he was the Christ, he could not have been crucified. See, they go the opposite way. The Jews accept the reality of the crucifixion and say that's proof that Jesus was a bad man, not the Messiah. For Muslims, they can't handle the crucifixion because how could God allow his great prophet and Christ to have been killed in such a shameful way? It mustn't have happened then. So it was the resurrection that showed to his followers that he was indeed the Messiah, that Jesus fit the bill as this politico-religious figure. Jesus, the Messiah, was not just a religious figure, it had political connotations. Now, what does this have to do with moral theology? Or what does this have to do with moral norm? The Messiah, if Jesus were really the Messiah, that overturns everything. Maybe that explains why the high priest reacted so violently against Jesus, because it meant that the high priest didn't have a job anymore. The high priest wasn't in charge anymore. The Romans weren't in charge anymore. All the people that would tell you what to do were gone because the Mashiach was here. He was now the norm for Jewish life. He was the one who was going to defeat the enemies. He was the one who was going to reinstitute the law of Moses. He was the one who was going to bring peace forever. So you didn't need all these institutions anymore. He was now the norm for how you would live a Jewish life. And you see that in how Jesus, this is why people were talking about, maybe Jesus is the Christ, because Jesus starts going along and starts, if you read the Gospels, that's why I had you read them, Jesus starts taking like the law of Moses and making it all about him, you know? He says, Moses was writing about me in the law. He tells the Jews in the Gospel of John, the crowd of Jews. Don't you understand? When you read the law, you're reading about me. What the hell, Jesus? You're not even 50 years old. You know, the crowd even says that. You're a young man. You're not even 50. You're not even, that's where Iron Ears got it from. And, you know, they couldn't understand how he could be the basis for how they were now supposed to live Judaism. But the reason that you could claim to be the basis was only if he really did believe, in some sense, he was the Messiah. That's the only, even though Jesus did not go around saying, hey, Mashiach, hey, Mashiach, hey, Mashiach, the things he was doing and saying about himself, though, even with the Jewish religion, it was no longer it was all about him now for his followers. To become a follower of Jesus meant that Moses, Ezra the scribe, all the prophets, the temple worship, okay? All of it now was, Jesus would tell me now how to understand those things. Even God. You know, the apostles didn't wake up one morning and say, we believe in one God. The non-Jews believe in a lot of gods. Let's split the difference. We'll create 3 gods and say it's one God. You know what I'm saying? No, they had this experience. Their God was the one God of Israel. There was only one God. There's nothing else. And yet Jesus shows up on the scene talking about God as his father. How many times does Jesus talk about Joseph? Or his father Joseph? Never. There is no statement ever from the mouth of Jesus. Jesus talks about his mother, usually giving her the slap down. Don't tell John Paul II about that. I know he had great devotion to Our Lady, but you know, all the times that we have Jesus kind of mixing with Mary, it's to kind of say, Mom, there's a distance between us. You know what I'm saying? And I have an old Irish mother, so I can kind of understand that, you know. She can be very pushy. I gotta say, Mom, I'm at work now. Stop calling me every 5 minutes to tell me what the cats are doing. No.
It's a dog crowd.
I was trying to lighten.
We're
I just find it
there.
interesting.
I'm just excited for slide 3, I'm telling you.
We're past.
I know. It's like, I know, we're speeding up here.
So Jesus never talks about God as his father. And it comes to a point where in the gospel, in the Gospel of John, we have this kind of kerfuffle where the crowd of Jews says to Jesus, you know, what are you talking about, God is your father? You know, that Abraham's our father, who's yours? In fact, there's a little bit of an interesting thing here. I wonder sometimes if John did not know about the virgin birth, or at least that there was a weird story about how Jesus was born. Because the Jews, some of the Jews in the crowd turn to Jesus and say, we know our father is Abraham, Jesus, but we don't know who your father is. We do know who Jesus' father is. It's Joseph from Nazareth. Isn't it? Well, as Luke says, as was presumed. No one really knew. That's the end. And I might be wrong on that, but if you go on and read Jesus' response, it's one of those places where Jesus gets angry and calls the crowd of Jews, no, your father's not Abraham. It is Satan, the devil. They insulted his origins.
Where is this?
It's in the Gospel of John. I think it is it's after chapter 5. You want me to find it? Oh, wait, you want me to go on to the next slide? Now you want me to do this?
Yeah, no, the slide, go to
You want to put me on the
Yeah.
griddle?
Yeah.
Oh man, I wish this were in red. It's so much harder for me to, I wish I had the,
I can look it up, that's okay.
that's all right.
I'm in John 5 now.
That's the bread of life discourse, curing a
Yes,
Sabbath.
6 is the bread of life.
Okay, it's the one where they're talking about, it might be actually chapter 8, I'm sorry. It's where they're talking about Abraham as their father and the origins of the Messiah.
Okay.
Or chapter 10, because there's another one where he talks about that as well.
No,
They
it's
say
it's John 8:39.
You're right
Okay.
around verse 39.
Okay, our father's Abraham, but we don't know where you are from. Okay, if God were your father, you would love me, et cetera, and so forth. So you can answer. All right. They even call Jesus a Samaritan, which means a heretic, essentially. You are not you are a heretic. Okay. But your father, I think it's before that where it says your father is the devil. That's why you don't believe in him. Yes. You carry out your you belong to the devil. You willingly carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in truth. When he tells a lie, it's in character. Jesus is pissed there. They essentially said, your mama. That if you want to put it into like, the Good Life Bible or something, they essentially said, your mama. Like your mama's something. But your birth wasn't from her, wasn't legit, Jesus. Ours is. We have Abraham as our father. And Jesus goes beyond even Abraham and says, I'm beyond Abraham. I existed before him. So how about that? Well, how about that? They pick up stones to kill him because he's blasphemed. He's associated himself with God.
And he had hide.
Ah,
And he had hide.
he ran away, yeah. Oh, Jesus, Just like, the teaching of like Buddhism. The best thing is not to fight, It's not to fight. Okay, let me turn my page here. The whole of the New Testament and the whole of Catholic theology, all of it, whether it's dealing with the Bible, here we're dealing with moral theology, fundamental theology, like basic theological basics, okay, like the Trinity or something, or Jesus. Whether you're talking, I'm missing an area of theology, but I forget. There are a number of specialties, but I think I've hit the main ones. Biblical, fundamental stuff, and moral stuff.
Practical.
Practical theology, good, thank you. Pastoral theology, good. I think that's the one of the pastoral theology. Also, stuff like mystical theology and stuff like that. Interesting stuff. In which I am not well versed, so please don't sign me up for any classes, sister. Unless you're going to give me a whole summer to do some reading. And of course, prayer would be nice. The Paschal mystery, okay, Mr. Cusano, this is where we get to our discussion last time about the Passover. Because Pesach means Passover in Hebrew, the passing over, that's all it means. There's an event in the history, this is where the Egyptian origins of the Jews come from, the Israelites. They're apparently, we don't necessarily know how they got there, okay? I know the Bible has stories about how the Jews got to Egypt, but we don't necessarily know. But if you read like the book of Exodus, the Jews are just there. The Hebrews are already living in Egypt. They apparently have been living there for quite a while, okay? And they're starting to feel the pressure of being outsiders, of not being Egyptians, okay? Of not being of the local population. And so, the local population looks down on them. There was a period of time, apparently, where the Jews were more integrated, but that has changed. And so now they're kind of thinking about, things are not good, and so God sends someone to save them and bring them back to the place where he always wanted them, which is the sandy, the dusty, the hot land of Canaan, or Palestine, or Israel, or whatever you want to call it now. Okay, whatever you want to call it. Although, I mean, I've seen pictures, there are parts of Israel that are quite beautiful, like Galilee, that are green and rich and whatever, but a lot of from the central to the southern region, it's simply hot and dusty. It seems to be sandy, if Google Street View is any indication, you know, driving around the streets of Tel Aviv on Google Streets, Google Street View. Anyways, so God brings them back, and to do this, he has to kind of overthrow the Egyptian rulers who don't want to let them go, okay, for whatever reason. Supposedly they were using them as slaves, whatever, okay. Nevertheless, they want to leave. The local rulers won't let them leave. So God says, I will send my angel, it's called a spirit, okay. I will send this creature of death that will pass over the land and will kill off the firstborn child of everyone, even the animals. Even the animals. I will kill off their firstborn calves and sheep, what do they call it, lambs, and whatever, ducklings. And can you imagine that, God killing off the firstborn duckling? Or the firstborn chick? I mean, what do you have to do to piss off the God of Israel for him to kill a little chick? You know? Oh, well, my little kid, you know, screw you, you're the first chick, you know, bam-o! Okay? So that's the story, okay? What actually happened, I don't know, I wasn't there. Whether there was a plague of some sort or whatever, but something happened that was monumental in the history of the Jews that they call the Passover, where something happened where they didn't die, they were somehow spared from this awful event, and they attributed it to their God, who had passed them over as well. This angel had not only passed over killing, but also had passed them over in not killing their firstborn children. Okay? So they were able to escape back to what they believed was their homeland, the land of Canaan, or Canaan, I've heard it pronounced as well. But, you know, Israel, Palestine, the same region. Right down here. Okay? To which they go. This event was remembered yearly. For the most part, interestingly enough. But if you read your Bible, you know for a long, long time, the Jews did not celebrate the Passover. They forgot. And so there are theories as to why that is in the story. But anyways, nevertheless, all you need to know is that by the time of Jesus, certainly the celebration of Passover, the saving of the Jews by their God from slavery, was a regular yearly event. It was a big event. A lot of big bucks for Jerusalem. A lot of thousands of people would come in. They'd have to pay taxes for the temple and give donations and convert their money. This is a big money maker. Okay? Pesach. The Paschal mystery is that Jesus, around this time, around the year 33 AD, again, I'm hoping you know what AD means. It does not mean after death, because Jesus could not die. Thank you. Good. Okay. I know. I have to tell the undergrads.
Now they use CE and BCE.
Yeah. I look at it this way. There's no way you can change how our calendar is based. I mean, you can change it, but to cover it up with something that doesn't exist. I mean, you could go to our history department and talk to Dr. Sir Giovanni, and I forget there's a woman there, Dr. I forget her name, Dr. So ask them what the common era is. There's no such thing. Or at least ask them what happened in 1 CE to suddenly make it 1 CE. You know, there's no common. Just don't worry about it if you don't want to talk about it. So it is this Passover. What happens now for Christians is during this great celebration that occurs. Again, we had this talk with Jerry in the last class a couple of weeks ago. Jesus and his followers don't celebrate it. This last year of Jesus' life, okay, Jesus prepares a Passover, but it is not the Jewish Passover that they knew. Because Jesus dies on the Passover. He celebrates this Passover ceremony, something he calls his Pesach, days before he's crucified, or at least a couple days before he's crucified with his followers. Well, it depends on which version you believe. I should say days before. Like a day before, okay? And there's a little bit of wonkiness between the story of John and the stories of Matthew, Mark, and Luke about what actual day this occurs. I mean, if you believe the story from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, everything occurred like on one day, you know, like Friday. Jesus had the Passover and he was arrested. John is talking about traditions. It's interesting that, and you know this as a liturgical musician, I think, from the history of liturgy, it's interesting how John, which is general, you know, people don't usually give it a lot of credit as being historical, but it's the version we follow for the life of Jesus. At least on certain details, like having Holy Thursday, and then Good Friday, and then Holy Saturday, and Easter Sunday. So whatever happened, Jesus holds this final meal with his followers, which he calls his Passover. And it's only in light of what happens to him after that he is arrested and killed. But then he's raised from the dead. It's only, again, it's kind of like Christ, it's only in the aftermath that they start seeing what Jesus was doing here. And you can kind of see this, interestingly enough, in again, something we talked about last time about the versions, or at least the Last Supper. The Last Supper. Because if you read the words of Jesus, it's very odd. I mean, it's odd in the context of a Passover because it's nothing like we know from a Jewish Passover should have been or would have been. Jesus takes bread and says, "It is my body." He takes a cup of wine and said, "This is the cup of my blood, which will be poured out." Or actually, I'm sorry, excuse me, I made my own mistake. Which is poured out for you. None of these in the Greek are in the future tense. He's not talking about this is going to happen to me. Which you think of the symbology going. He's saying even before I haven't been arrested yet, Jesus hasn't been arrested, he hasn't been betrayed, he hasn't even gone to the garden yet. And he's already saying that this bread which will be handed over for you, this wine which will be shed for you, now is that already. It's already his body and blood that will be on the cross, that will be beaten, that will be killed.
Okay, so you're saying that the language that is used in the gospel, let's take Luke for instance.
It's interesting.
Because there's no institution narrative in John. So in Luke, for instance, is in present tense.
All of them are in present
Okay.
tense. They all
It's
agree on
very
that.
interesting because the Roman liturgy uses future tense.
Yes.
The
tradition.
uses future tense for the blood,
Yeah, it's
not for the body.
the word, yeah, and that was one of the things that Vatican, as I'm sure you know, Vatican II kind of cleaned it up to make the language coincide more with the biblical text. The institution narrative in the canon, the Roman canon, which is
Yeah.
Eucharistic Prayer 1 now,
Yeah.
which they've changed, was traditional. It's interesting because you can compare it. It's not exactly like the words that you find in Paul or any of the synoptics. It was handed down orally. It's from a time of oral tradition. It's very ancient. The first instances we have of the Roman canon are from Ambrose of Milan in the 3rd century. So it was already then a standard text. Okay. It was not the oldest. If you want to look for the oldest, you read the oldest one was, of course, Jerusalem's liturgy, which already by the 300s was fully developed.
You can have to adjust it.
But think about that. Jesus is talking in the present tense about something that hasn't, none of it has happened yet. But he's already connecting in the present the bread and the wine with his crucifixion. Now, you could say that the evangelists might be doing that. Now,
But they agree on it.
Huh?
But they agree on it, do they?
Well, they agree on it. They agree on it. The text of Paul and Corinthians and Luke and Mark and Matthew all agree.
Is it an ontological thing?
Yeah, is it something, this is where you talk about like the presence of Christ in those elements, because he's saying that they are me. And John comes out and says that, you know, unless the very famous thing in John chapter 6 about eating his flesh, which is not eating his flesh. The literal Greek says chewing like an animal. Unless you gnaw like an animal, it's a Greek word. Some words like Greek have different words for human eating and for animal eating.
Mm.
I know this because when I took German in high school, German has the same thing. If I'm a cat eating food, I use fressen, but if I'm a human being, eat, I say essen, eat. Don't ever say fressen, because in German it will be, people will laugh at you. It'll be like, what are you, a cow or something? You're eating your food? No, you essen, you eat. You know, Greek had the same thing. It had a different word for eating that was used for animals.
And that's the word that Jesus would have used.
I don't know.
Or it's reported,
It's reported
it's
that he did.
reported to have used.
So Jesus makes the Passover all about him. The lamb that you eat, I mean, all the symbols, and you have to remember, Passover, it's celebrated now by the Jews, has gone through a lot of development from the Middle Ages. So I'm not sure that we know a great deal, but the thing that Jews did around Jesus' time was similar to as it's described in the Bible, where you have I think it's a lamb or a goat that's been roasted, you have some herbs that you eat, and these all were given symbols about, the herbs were bitter because our slavery was bitter. The lamb, I don't know if they ever symbolized the lamb as anything, though. Certainly lambs were a big part of Jewish sacrifice. But Christians would. Christians would take the idea of the Lamb, and you already see by the Gospel of John, Jesus is being called the Lamb of God, which will give its life for the sins of the world. I mentioned the book of Revelation. The Lamb that was killed and still has the wound in his visions, and yet is alive again. So this idea about Jesus as the Lamb of the Passover, this imagery that can only really come from the Passover, or at least from the temple sacrifices where lambs were sacrificed, for the sins of the people. That's the only instance where lambs would have been sacrificed for sins, would be the temple. I don't think the lamb was a sin offering, or it's represented as a sin offering in the Passover. But again, Jesus makes a ceremony about him and what's going to happen to him. And notice, if you go to a Catholic church, Presbyterian church, any Christian church, if they have the Lord's Supper, you don't mention the Exodus at all, do you? Nothing. There's nothing about the Jewish heritage of what that rite comes from.
Except on Holy Thursday.
Yeah. You have, also,
Easter Vigil.
and Easter
Vigil.
If they actually read all the readings. I've never been to a Catholic church that has done all the readings.
I have once, but not even in Rome do they do it.
No. We are lazy people.
I agree with you there.
One night a week.
I agree.
Or a year.
I agree with you there. In the Exultet.
It's mentioned?
Yes.
Exultet?
This is our Passover feast, yes.
Excellent, sir.
Yes.
You are right. I had forgotten about that. Again, could this have come, the Paschal mystery, the mystery of the Passover, but it's not a Passover where God passes over his people. What kind of Passover is it? It's where it's Jesus' Passover. It's not even Christians' Passover anymore. The Passover for the Jews was that God passed over all of them. But again, Jesus is now the standard. What happens to him is the standard. So the Passover is that he has passed over from having been dead, a corpse, to now being alive forever. Does anyone have the time? I'm sorry, I left my watch.
It is 8:20.
8:20.
Oh, okay, so thank you, sis. You're keeping time for me? What? You don't have to stay for the whole class. You know this. All right, sister. All right, I got you. All right. I'm actually moving faster than I thought.
I see that. Absolutely. Like the last two slides were in like 10 minutes. Okay.
The resurrection. This is the event. This is the Passover. This is like the confirmation of everything that happens to Jesus. God brings to life the dead body of Jesus. The word resurrection, as you can see in Latin, simply is re surgo, to rise up again, a surge. We're talking about the storm surge during the hurricanes, a rising up, or to simply lift something up. So lifting up again. Why do you stand so many times during the Catholic Mass? That is the resurrection position.
It looks like he's coming out shaking hands.
Oh yes.
Hey, glad to be back.
Yep. Hey,
He's going down the aisle.
Right, like he's coming in to give a State of the Union.
You get saving, you get saving, you get saving, you all get saving. I'll be here all week.
Yes, I know you will.
You happy with yourself?
This is why I sit all the way in the back. It's
Yeah, you're
the
that
spot.
one. You're that one. You're
I
that
am,
kid.
I
You're
am.
that kid. All right.
Okay.
Keep laughing, Mike. Keep laughing.
I included this because it's a part of my Eastern heritage. You can say it's fully Eastern because I spent the first 30 years as a Latin Catholic. But you don't, everything, one of the things I loved about the East and kind of felt home with was that they are not afraid of symbol. Personally, and maybe we could have a cup of coffee with Joe, or we're talking about liturgical change and stuff like that. And, but it seems like we're afraid of symbol. You just don't, but you go into an Eastern church, and if you're not punched in the face with just a cloud of incense and constant singing, then go to another Eastern church because you're not in the East yet. Keep moving, eat, and everything. And it's like a performance, and it's meant to be. The priest is in the temple performing the rituals. The deacon is out with the people praying prayers. People are moving around. And it's not rigid either. The Easterners will fight over some nonsense, but people move around lighting candles, kissing icons. People you might think that they're not involved. They're all over the place doing stuff. It's kind of like, it makes me think of like the old, I wasn't during it, but people used to almost, spit on these little old ladies or women who would pray the rosary during Mass. You're not paying attention. How dare you get up and light a candle to the Virgin during Mass, or go to confession and stuff like that. But now people are kind of like seeing that maybe we've lost something social to the liturgy, that it kind of pours out into everything people are doing. But it doesn't have to be like, okay, here we are, this is the vote, sit down, kneel, good, and don't touch that, that's a rosary, that's not for now, it's not for now, stay away from the candles, after Mass, everything is compartmentalized. But if you go to an Eastern church, as we theologians like to say, it's messy. People are all over the place. People are even on the floors in prayer. It's weird, it's great, it's crazy. Kind of like this dude. Notice, he is not dressed like a Jew, as you might think. He is dressed as a Greek garb, And, he doesn't look like some guy who's, at the hookah stand in Damascus. I'm just saying, You look, I'm not saying Jesus actually looked like this, but in the Galilee, there were a lot of people who were not Jews, a lot of people who were not of that culture. People dressed differently, they dressed in the Greek style a lot of times. Wore Greek hats and stuff like that.
The head, though, is Christ, what is that, Pantocrator?
Oh, no. Christ Pantocrator is a very specific picture.
No, I know that, but it reminds me of that. It's very similar.
Well, that's because the portraiture is very standardized. You can only really paint the face of Jesus or Mary or the saints in a very definite way. It's totally, and you'll see that that's totally different in the West, where, as you can see just from the church on campus, or you go to see Thomas More's, we're all over the place, In the East, that's no. You don't do that. Because, and to me, it's just a culture, it's the way they do it, but they all do it that way, All the Eastern churches do it that way, and there's a reason for that, because we don't know what Jesus looked like. And, God bless him, maybe you've heard the stories, maybe it's a rumor, an urban legend. I'm passing on an urban legend or whatever, kill me. But, maybe you heard the story of the guy who, stonecutter, who made a statue of the Virgin Mary, and he used his mother as the portrait for the face. I don't know if I could do that. If someone made like a statue of Jesus and used me as the face, I don't know if I could pray before that statue. Kind of be like, almost, it'd just be, I don't know, that's what I'd have to say. You have to agree with my born-again Christian friends that it's a little bit idolatrous. You've gone too far, Matthew. Get saved. Find Jesus. Oh, I have, sir. Now, this is all stereotypical, okay? Jesus, this is the real, sometimes you can't see down here, but like the gates of hell. And Jesus is standing on the devil. He's crushed the devil underneath him.
Well, it's also Psalm 64. I hold the keys of death in the middle road.
Okay, excellent.
I once was dead, but now I am alive, and I hold the keys of death in the netherworld.
That is Revelation.
Yeah.
That is Revelation. I'm the first and the last. How do I know that?
Right.
That's your
Oh, you know what?
thing.
You're right.
That's your idea.
It's the, you know what it is? It's the antiphon for that psalm during the trib.
It's okay.
Yeah.
This is Hades.
Yep.
This is not Sheol, so don't confuse. This is Hades, okay? So think about, and the devil is like, and remember, Hades was a Greek god, the god of the underworld. So early Christians, I mean, there's all sorts of kind of anti-pagan propaganda going on here that Jesus has crushed your God. Jesus, the bright, and they talk about it in the liturgy, like some of the antiphons talk about, the bright light of Jesus coming down into Hades has destroyed. Hades is now afraid. It's like, what is this? This thing is coming down into my realm, and it's Jesus. This is Adam and Eve. Jesus, the resurrection, which makes all things new. The sin, the disobedience of Adam and Eve has now been rectified by the one who was obedient unto death. This is Adam and Eve. Here you will see pictures of kings and prophets. I forget which prophet this is, but see he has his hands up in prayer. The kings, okay, the ancient kings of the Jews. We don't think enough, in the Easterners, there is anti-Semitism in some of their stuff still on Good Friday. We've gotten rid of it, but they have stuff like, statements like, you know, oh Jacob, why have you killed your kid? You know, so.
And the perfidious Jews.
Well, they don't have that. We used to have that, the unfaithful Jews.
Right, we used to have that.
However, one thing we do not, that I've noticed after transferred with the permission of the Pope, is there is so much in this for Jewish-Christian relations because they have stuff in the East that we don't have. They have, for example, feast days that honor all the ancestors of Jesus, all of his Jewish ancestors. Not just those who were related to Jesus, but all the prophets and holy men and women of Israel. Imagine if we had a feast day, a solemnity in the Catholic Church dedicated to the Jews. That we Gentiles, because most of them are Gentiles, where we come together and we thank God for these people who were faithful to God, who received the Messiah, those who believed in him, passed it on to us, and we Gentiles could be saved. They always, I mean, the prophets, Joel, Hosea, they're all saints in the calendar. They used to, I got you for one more minute, sister. We used to honor the saints of the Old Testament in the calendar. We don't anymore. But they still do. And so they're there. Jesus, the resurrection is not just about today. It's about all time. It goes all the way back to the very first chapters of Genesis, where this male and female were created but fell away from God. So Jesus, in his resurrection, is now trans-historical. He is the only norm for Christians, and he covers everything. All history, all relationships. He is Lord of my sex life. He's Lord of my wallet, should be. Lord of how I run my business or how I teach. He's Lord of my family. He's Lord of my inner thoughts, should be. He wants to be Lord of everything. There's nothing you keep from him. Nothing. He is now the total, all-encompassing norm. And so when we continue on talking about, and we get into what moral action is and all these philosophical things, it's easy to lose sight of it, but I would say, caution, you never lose sight of who is the norm, always. His teachings and who he was. God bless you all. I'm on to 6 when we come back. 6 for online. I'll finish this up again.
I thought that was a very good conclusion, though.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone know why? Does anyone know why?
No, but I'm saying that was right. That was. Oh.
If you look at the screen very carefully, and, I see, that's something in the PowerPoint.
What?
The background of
The background
the background of your slide. All
It's a
these
hidden
words for
message
Jesus,
coming
right?
forward.
It's for Jesus Christ in different languages.
There you go. Okay.
Like a watermark.
Like a watermark.
Watermark, there you go.
I'm going to try to get up.
I'm subliminal, Ms. Caponegro.
Subliminal.
I'm subliminal.
Nothing-
Good night.
nothing-
Good
On
night.
Project MK Ultra, CIA. Yeah, I don't. God bless you, sister.
I want to see what he saw, I don't see it.
Look,
Yeah, back up here.
Neither do I, but Jesus Christo, Senor.
There's all, I saw the Tagalog at the top.
Right here.
uh,
See, it says there.
Oh,
Okay.
I didn't see that. I
It
couldn't
wasn't
see
good.
it.
That's because you had to be where I am.
Have a good evening, all. Good
God bless you.
I am much more perceptive than you think.
Well, Ed, I'm gonna need that
Well,
extra
for a
credit.
musician.
My wife would be laughing right now. And she said that you should have smacked me that time over the head, and she would have loved it. She would have held me down.
I know.
I'll show you coming to my car.
Oh, yes, I am.
Oh,
Ooh, it's,
Yes.
all
All
right.
right, Dr. Dunn, see you
Thank
later.
you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Miss.
thanks for your class.
Mary,
And I'll take those extra credit points.
Yes, you will.
I'm gonna need them.
You might just send me an email to remind me, but I'll try to remember. 5 extra points.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, I'll do it
On
now.
top of your paper.
Yeah, on my forehead, so the next time I come, you can remember.
Yeah, I'll do it now. Take a moment.
yeah, me too. I forgot my jacket.
Participation, where's my
I forgot my
participation?
jacket and then, oh, I have to.
Okay, let's see, there's Marshall done.
Okay, have a good week.
You too, sir, see you in a couple weeks.
Me too.
Okay, let's see. Okay, Mr. Trillo, God bless you. This is Dr. Dunn signing off.